Hi guys, and welcome to Relaxation Bedtime History. Tonight we step into a town that hardly looks finished, as if someone sketched it in dust hammered together a few walls and then invited trouble to move in before the paint could dry. You stand at the edge of a Wild West street under a wavering lantern, with wagon ruts hard as baked clay beneath your boots and piano notes leaking out of a saloon like tired gold. The air smells of horses, coal smoke, perfume, frying meat, and that very specific frontier blend of ambition and poor sanitation. It is dramatic, certainly, but let us be honest, you probably will not survive this experience with your illusions intact. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, post your location and local time in the comments. Now dim the lights, you arrive just before evening, which is when the town begins putting on its face. In daylight, it looks blunt and practical. Boardwalks tilt at odd angles. Laundry snaps between buildings. Dogs nose through rubbish. Men spit tobacco with the confidence of people who believe pavement is a personal insult. But now the storefront windows glow softly, and the whole place performs a transformation. It wants to seem richer, softer, more civilized than it really is. The Wild West loves costumes. It wears respectability over hunger, the way a saloon singer wears silk over cold skin. You are not here as a tourist, although, frankly, that would be a terrible career choice. You are here because women did come to these towns in significant numbers, and some entered sex work for reasons that were usually less scandalous than later legend liked to pretend. A very ordinary fact, though no less sobering for being ordinary, is that western boom towns often had far more men than women. Mining camps, cattle towns, rail stops, and newly founded settlements attracted male labour in large numbers. Where there is loneliness, cash, and a weak social safety net, a market appears with almost magical speed. Not the fun kind of magic, sadly. More the kind that smells faintly of stale beer and overdue rent. So you come in with a carpet bag or a trunk, maybe both if you still own enough to justify the optimism. The road behind you is not one clean story. Perhaps you are widowed, perhaps abandoned. Perhaps you are running from a farm, a factory, a violent home, or a city that has already used you up. Perhaps you are promised work as a seamstress, a singer, a waitress, a domestic servant, and discovered that on the frontier, those categories slide into one another until all the edges blur. People later loved tidy morality tales. They liked the fallen woman, the wicked temptress, the tragic beauty. Real life is much more irritatingly mixed. Need presses from one side, chance from the other, and somewhere in the middle you make a choice that may not feel much like a choice at all. The first thing you notice is how noisy everything is. Wagons creak, spurs jingle. Men laugh too loudly because half of them are lonely and the other half are pretending not to be. A hammer keeps striking somewhere down the street because the American West is always under construction in both a literal and deeply emotional sense. From a nearby kitchen comes the smell of onions and coffee. From the stable manure and hay. From the saloon cigar smoke and cheap soap. From the parlour house at the corner where lace curtains hang like a promise, there drifts the sharper sweetness of violet water or rose perfume, trying bravely to defeat all the rest. That house catches your eye, because it knows how to catch the eye. The windows glow amber, the curtains are cleaner than anything else on the street. There is music inside, not perfect music, but enough to create the idea of refinement, and that idea matters. A woman in this world is not simply selling an encounter. She is often expected to sell the illusion of gentility, ease, listening, admiration. A room where the mud stays outside for 1 hour. The West is full of men who claim they want rough freedom and then pay extra for embroidered cushions. You wait in the shadows for a moment and study the women who pass through the doorway. Their dresses are brighter than most respectable wives would wear in town, though that rule shifts wildly from place to place. One wears green silk with jet beads at the sleeves. Another has a feather tilted in her hair. Their posture is practiced. Their laughter is too well timed. Yet under the powder, under the ribbons, under the little pièce of costume jewellery, there is something far more practical than glamour. Calculation, endurance, the ability to read a room in 3 seconds and decide whether it is worth entering. A peculiar frontier tidbit, one that sounds almost too theatrical to be true, is that some women did keep songbirds in cages inside parlour house. Canary or finch added a touch of domestic sweetness, a tiny chirping symbol that the house was cultured, feminine, almost homelike. Imagine that for a moment. Outside mud and drunks and revolver bravado, inside a little yellow bird hopping on a perch while a customer tries to believe he has wandered into elegance. The West could stage a fantasy with the cheapest props and still get a full house. You step closer. From inside comes the sound of a piano working hard at a tune that would be more charming if the instrument had all its strings in equal agreement. A man exits smiling vaguely, hat in hand, as if he has just visited a cousin, rather than a business. That is part of the strange theatre too. Everybody knows what happens here, and half the town spends its energy pretending it does not know so much. Public morality and private behaviour are already doing their little frontier dance. Historians still argue whether prostitution in Western towns was more widespread than popular mythology suggests, or whether later storytelling simply placed it at the centre of frontier life because it made the West seem more colourful, sinful, and marketable. There were certainly brothels, cribs, and red light districts in many settlements. There were also laundresses, boarding house keepers, cooks, shop girls, school teachers and wives trying to create stable homes in unstable places. But myth likes a red lamp in the window. Myth likes piano music. Myth likes a woman at the top of the stairs with a knowing smile, because that image is easier to sell than the exhausting economics underneath it. And economics is what begins to settle over you now, heavier than the evening air. You count what you have left. Coins in a purse, maybe a ring you could pawn, maybe not. A room costs money, food costs money, laundry costs money. Existing, as it turns out, has always maintained a rather rude invoice. If you are alone in this town, there are not many soft landings available. Domestic service might pay little and demand everything. Factory work is often far away. Marriage is a gamble disguised as rescue. Respectability that prized Victorian treasure is much easier to praise than to afford. So the house on the corner starts to look less like a scandal and more like a door. Not a magical one, not a glamorous one, just a door with lamplighting under it. When you finally cross the street, the boardwalk gives a small hollow knock under your step. You feel the rough grain through the soles of your boots. The night breeze cools the back of your neck where dust has settled. Somewhere a mule complains to the universe. Somewhere else 2 men argue over cards. The town is wide awake now, restless and glittering at the edges, and you are moving towards the place where its loneliness is turned into income. At the entrance you pause. The brass knob is warm from other hands. You catch your reflection in the glass panel beside the door, dim and slightly warped. For one heartbeat you see the person you were this morning, and for another you see the person this town might allow you to become. Not because it is generous. Frontier towns are rarely generous, but because they are hungry and hungry places make room for all kinds of bargains. Inside voices murmur. Fabric rustles. Someone laughs low and practiced. The canary gives one bright absurd note from its cage. You breathe in powder lamp oil, whiskey, wood polish, and the faint, damp smell of too many people trying to seem composed. Then the door opens and the woman who studies you from the hall does not look shocked or cruel or even particularly curious. She looks experienced. She has seen your sort of arrival before. Desperate, determined, tired, watchful. She tilts her head, taking your measure with a glance so swift it feels like a draft across your skin. And just like that, with the street at your back and the lamplight ahead, the night begins to teach you what it actually costs to survive here. The woman in the hall lets the door fall shut behind you with a soft click that somehow sounds firmer than a lock, not loud, not dramatic, just definite. The street is gone at once, along with its wagon noise and windblown grit, and in its place comes a different kind of frontier weather. Warm air, lamplight, the sweet powdery scent of violet water trying its best to civilize a building full of secrets. The wallpaper, if you can call it that, is ambitious rather than elegant, red flocking, a little worn at the edges, a gilt mirror that flatters nobody under close inspection. 2 chairs positioned as if they expect very serious conversation, though the room itself has no patience for illusions that grand. The woman is not old, though the room gives her a kind of authority that adds years where it wants them. She wears dark silk, not flashy but costly enough to say she is established. Her hair is neat. Her hands are neat. Her expression is neat too, which may be the most dangerous detail of all. She glances at your bag, your boots, the hem of your dress, the tired set of your shoulders. Then she names the first rule of the place without even sounding like she is doing it. You need a better name, and there it is, Frontier Reinvention in 7 syllables. This part of the West is strangely modern in one respect. It understands branding, not with billboards and influencer lighting, obviously, though that would have been entertaining, but with names that shimmer just enough to suggest a different life. Women in the trade often used aliases. Some sounded French, because Americans of the 19th century loved sprinkling Frenchness over vice and calling it sophistication. Some sounded aristocratic, as if a fallen duchess had somehow wandered into Nevada by accident. Some were simply prettier than the names a woman had been born with. Belle, Ruby, Pearl, Dolly, Kitty, Lola. A whole gallery of sparkling little inventions. Your real name may still be sitting warm in your chest, but it is suddenly treated like luggage too heavy to carry upstairs. This was not always pure whimsy. It was protection, however partial. A new name made it harder for family to trace you harder, for local gossips to pin you to old scandal, harder for one version of your life to chase down another. It also helped create the performance expected in places like this. You're not just a woman entering a business, you're a persona entering a room. There is a difference, and the difference pays. Or at least it sometimes pays before expenses take their cheerful little bite. The woman studies you again and suggests something softer than your own name, something with a glint to it. You test it scantily. It does not fit at first. Then again, neither do many things on the frontier. Boots blister. Corsets pinch. New towns feel borrowed until they do not. Perhaps names work the same way. You say it aloud and she nods once as if paperwork has been completed in some invisible ledger. The fact beneath all this theatricality is plain enough. Mobility was one of the defining realities of life in the American West. Men reinvented themselves constantly as miners, gamblers, lawmen, ranchers, or supposed entrepreneurs. Women did it too, though theirs was often judged much more harshly. Census records, newspaper notices, arrest logs, and memoirs are full of leapary identities and altered personal histories. Birthplaces shift, ages shrink, marital statuses transform with suspicious ease. If the whole region runs on hope, bluff, and reinvention, why should women be denied the same costume trunk? You are shown a washstand, a cracked basin, and a room that is not yours but may become yours for as long as you can afford it or obey the house rules. The wallpaper is less red here and more faded pink. There is a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a chair, a pitcher of water, a trunk in the corner left by someone else or bought second-hand. The window looks onto the alley, which is not poetic but is at least honest. You set down your bag and feel that odd little lurch people get when they arrive somewhere they may need to call home. Then comes the interview, if one may use such a respectable word for something held in a parlour, where the piano downstairs has gone slightly flat. The woman asks where you came from. You tell some truth, but not all. Everyone here seems to understand the proportions. She asks whether anyone is likely to come searching for you. That question lands differently. It is practical, yes, but it also reminds you that the past has legs. She asks whether you can read, whether you can sew a little, whether you know how to pour drinks without spilling, whether you can keep your temper, whether you are sick, whether you drink too much, whether you fight. Notice what she does not ask. She does not ask if you are innocent. The frontier has no time for literary categories. You begin to understand that reinvention is not merely decorative, it is an operating system. Women in this world often carried layered biographies, each one adjusted for audience and need. To a customer, you may be a refined lady fallen on hard times. To the local shopkeeper, perhaps a widow. To the sheriff, perhaps nobody worth naming unless taxes are due. To the church, women handing out tracts, perhaps a soul in peril. To yourself on certain tired nights, perhaps just a person making tomorrow possible. A quirky detail from the period is that some women embroidered initials onto handkerchiefs or undergarments using their adopted names rather than their real ones. Imagine the strange intimacy of that. Stitch by stitch, thread by thread, you make the disguise tangible. Not just spoken, but sewn. There is something almost tender and slightly eerie about it, like handwriting practice for a stranger you are becoming. Downstairs, the house continues breathing around you. Glasses clink, someone laughs too brightly, chairs scrape. You hear one of the other women moving along the hall humming under her breath. She passes your door with a rustle of skirts and a touch of perfume that smells of orange blossom and powder. The sound is comforting and lonely at once. You're not alone here, and yet everything in this place reminds you that every woman protects some private corner of herself like a candle cupped against the wind. The woman returns with a dress draped over one arm. Not fine, but finer than what you have. Blue with black trim. The waist needs taking in. The sleeves are a little too long. She tells you it will do for now. This house, you realise, runs on the remains of other lives. Dresses handed down, trunks reused. Jewellery pawned and redeemed and pawned again. A braid of hairpins on the dressing table like tiny metal bones. Reinvention, yes, but thrift never sleeps. Historians still dispute how much agency women in Western prostitution really exercise when adopting new identities. Some scholars emphasise self-fashioning strategy and the ability to negotiate a brutal labour market. Others caution that alias and elegance could mask coercion debt or sheer lack of alternatives. Both views hold something true. The old temptation is to split women into heroines or victims, but most lives refuse to stay in one tidy paragraph. A woman could be shrewd and trapped, inventive and exhausted, practical and deeply sad, all before breakfast. The woman asks your age. Here too, truth becomes negotiable. A year or two vanishes if needed. Maybe 3, the mirror on the wall seems to approve. In the 19th century, youth was currency in more than one line of work, and the house knows it. You give the number that best suits the room. Then she asks where you learned to speak the way you do. That startles you, because speech is another costume. Accent, grammar, posture, the way you say sir with a faint smile, or laugh at the right moment, all of it matters. Some brothels, especially the more expensive parlour houses, sold not only intimacy but class performance. Customers paid for the illusion of conversation in a refined household. They wanted piano music, tidy table linens, and women who could discuss novels they had never read or cities they had never seen. The frontier adored the appearance of culture, particularly when culture came with curls and candlelight. You sit while she brushes out your hair with efficient strokes. Not unkind, but not maternal either. Practical grooming. At the edge of the mirror, you catch yourself becoming less like the dusty traveller from the street and more like the version of woman this house can use. Hair smoothed, face washed, collar adjusted. Even your posture changes as if the chair itself expects better manners. It is unsettling, this ease with which surface reshapes. But perhaps that is what the West itself is doing. Towns with plank sidewalks call themselves cities. Saloons hang velvet curtains and call it refinement. Men with mud on their boots call themselves gentlemen by lamplight. So why should you not become someone else too, at least for the hours that pay? The woman finally steps back and looks at you with a measured satisfaction. She repeats the new name. This time it sounds less like theatre and more like instruction. You answer to it without thinking. Outside your little room, the hallway seems longer now, as though names have a way of altering architecture. The piano downstairs starts another tune. A door opens, then closes. Somewhere the canary gives a brief bright chirp, ridiculous and brave. You smooth the borrowed dress over your knees, touch the edge of the basin, and wonder which parts of yourself will survive the change, and which parts will be traded off in coins, favours, and careful silence. Not all at once, perhaps, nothing so dramatic, more quietly than that, bit by bit. A new name first, then a new voice, then if you are not careful, a new memory of who you were before you climbed these stairs. The house is waiting, and your old life, still dusty from the road, is already beginning to sound a little farther away. The hallway carries you forward before you have quite decided to move, which is often how large changes happen in places like this. Not with trumpets, not with a dramatic violin swell, but with a soft carpet runner under your shoes, and a woman downstairs calling for fresh lamp oil. The new name still feels strange in your mouth, like a sweet you are not sure you want to swallow, and yet you answer when someone speaks it. That is how quickly the house begins teaching you its grammar. You descend the stairs slowly, one hand brushing the polished rail. Down below, the parlour glows with the sort of warmth that takes planning. Curtains are drawn against the street. Lamps are turned low enough to flatter, but high enough to show the pattern in the wallpaper. A coal fire murmurs at the grate. The piano never perfect labours on with the stubborn confidence of an instrument that knows it is part of the illusion. A bottle of whiskey glints on a sideboard. So does a bowl of apples, polished until they seem almost decorative. Even fruit has been recruited into the performance. And performance, you learn very quickly, depends on category. Not every woman in the West works in a place like this. Not every place like this is even called the same thing. The frontier has its own hierarchy, and like all hierarchies, it is obsessed with walls, furniture, and who gets to sit on what. This house is what many people would have called a parlour house or a higher-end brothel. The point is not luxury in the modern sense. Nobody is handing out chilled towels or aromatherapy. The point is managed gentility. A man pays not just for privacy, but for an atmosphere that suggests refinement. He wants the illusion of a drawing room in a town that still smells of mule sweat when it rains. He wants velvet curtains, a respectable piano women in silk or imitation silk, maybe a glass with no obvious chips at the rim. It is civilization rented by the hour. Elsewhere in town, perhaps one street over or down near the freight yard, are the cribs. These are much smaller and rougher establishments, sometimes little more than one-room cabins where a woman works alone or under looser oversight. A crib might have a bed, a washstand, a chair, and not much else. The traffic is faster, the price is lower, the privacy thinner. In some districts, the doors stood close together one after another, with women sitting outside in the evening to attract custom. No lace curtains there, no piano trying to rescue the mood. Just business done with frontier bluntness. Between these poles lie all sorts of variations. Boarding house arrangements where sex work blends with lodging. Dance halls where flirtation drink sales and paid companionship mix together until only the owner knows which income stream matters most. Saloons upstairs from which rooms can be rented by the hour. Hotels with discreet understandings. The West does not care for neat filing cabinets, it cares for profit and convenience. A straightforward historical fact is that prostitution in Western towns was often spatially organised. Some communities tolerated it openly in designated districts, while others pushed it toward alleys, edge streets, or neighbourhoods that could be denounced publicly and visited privately. Urban planners, which is a hilariously grand term for men laying out muddy streets beside a mine often segregated vice informally or by ordnance. Respectability liked a buffer zone. It wanted to say, yes, that sort of thing exists, but over there, not where the bank can see it before breakfast. The madam or the housekeeper, if one feels euphemistic, begins your education by walking you through the rooms as if she were showing a cousin around a slightly questionable inn. This is the front parlour where first impressions are made. Chairs upholstered in burgundy, a table with cartes de visite arranged in a fan, a gas lamp that flickers just enough to look romantic and not enough to burn the place down, at least not tonight. The mirror above the mantel is framed in gilt that has seen better years, but at a distance it catches candlelight beautifully. Then there is the smaller sitting room, more intimate, more expensive. Here conversation happens before any decision is made. Men who pay well like to feel they are choosing, among personalities, not just rooms. They enjoy asking where you are from as if geography in a silk dress were itself an aphrodisiac. They enjoy being listened to. You already begin to suspect that half the trade is patients wearing perfume. Upstairs, the bedrooms differ. The largest has a brass bed and lace pillows yellowing at the edges. Another has floral wallpaper and a shelf of novels, some missing pages, because a room with books suggests a certain class of woman, even if nobody reads beyond chapter 2. The smallest rooms are plainer, where the seams of reality show through. Bed, basin, pitcher, hook on the wall, chamber pot tucked discreetly out of sight because everyone involved wishes desperately to pretend the human body is more poetic than plumbing allows. A curious little tidbit from several western vice districts is that some parlour houses displayed goldfish bowls, caged birds, or potted palms to create an atmosphere of domestic gentleness. Imagine it. Outside gunmetal sky and wagon mud. Inside a palm drooping nobly in the corner, like it has been promised California and delivered Kansas. The point was to signal softness, cultivation and leisure. Even the plants had jobs. You begin seeing that architecture decides reputation. A woman in a parlour house may be judged immoral, but she can also be described as elegant, stylish, almost glamorous by newspapers and memoir writers. A woman in a crib is more likely to be depicted as desperate, degraded, or rough. Yet the difference is often not character. It is rent. It is location. It is whether there is a piano downstairs and whether the wallpaper can hold on for one more season. Class enters every room before you do. The women themselves understand this with a precision scholar's envy. One of them, a red-haired woman with a low laugh and a chipped cameo at her throat, tells you that furniture is fate. She says it lightly, but you hear the truth in it. A brothel with decent carpets can charge more. Better clients, at least in theory. More protection from weather sometimes, from violence, certainly from humiliation. A house in a respectable district buys a little cover from the worst of town gossip, while a shack near the rail yard leaves a woman exposed to whatever mood the street delivers. Historians still debate how rigid these categories truly were. Some evidence suggests women moved between levels of the trade more often than old stereotypes imply. A woman might begin in a rough district, save enough to enter a better house, then slide back again after illness, debt, or age. Others argue that local conditions mattered so much that no single ladder existed at all. One town's elegant parlour house might be another town's barely furnished scandal. The West resists standardization, which is a polite way of saying it enjoyed making life difficult for future researchers. As the evening deepens, you watch how the front parlour functions almost like a stage set. Men are admitted, evaluated, steered. The better dressed ones linger near the fire. The louder ones are given a smile and subtly redirected. A house like this survives on selection as much as seduction. Too much chaos and the illusion tears. Too many drunken miners tracking mud on the carpet, and suddenly this is not a parlour house at all, but just another loud room with expensive lamps. You are told the prices in a voice so matter-of-fact it almost makes you laugh. No coyness, no blushes, just rates, room use percentages, and fines for breakage or drunken foolishness. Business is business even under lace curtains. There may be music and scent and banter, but beneath it all lies accounting. You're beginning to understand that every object in the room, every tassel and ribbon and polished apple exists because it helps produce the correct kind of customer. A younger woman, perhaps only a little older than you, shows you one of the cheaper upstairs rooms and whispers that the walls are thin. Thinner than morality, she says, then grins at her own joke. She points out which window sticks in summer, which basin leaks, which customer snores, which one cries, which one wants to talk about his mother, which one brings peppermints. This is practical knowledge passed woman to woman, far more useful than the moral instruction tracts being distributed somewhere else in town by ladies with excellent hats. The house on the corner you now see is not simply a house. It's a machine for transforming loneliness into income and decor into hierarchy. It sorts men by the depth of their pockets and women by what kind of room they can inhabit. It sells privacy while depending on a whole chorus of overheard sounds. It offers warmth while keeping a ledger near the desk. Outside these walls, the cribs and dance halls and cheap rented rooms continue their own nocturnal commerce. The same moon hangs over all of them indifferent and pale. Yet here in the parlour glow with the fire ticking softly, and someone refreshing the lamp chimneys, the difference between one life and another feels alarmingly dependent on curtains. You smooth your borrowed dress and sit where you're told between the mirror and the piano where the light catches your face kindly. Across the room, a man removes his gloves and glances up with the hungry, hopeful uncertainty of someone who wants to be charmed and fears looking foolish for wanting it. The room itself leans toward him, all warmth and polish and practiced ease. And as you breathe in, coal smoke, rose, water, furniture, polish, and the faint metallic tang of the lamp, you realize that in this world even softness has a floor plan. The madam does not raise her voice, and somehow that makes everyone listen more carefully. She stands near the mantel, one hand resting lightly on the edge, as if the entire house is balanced under her fingertips. You begin to see that nothing here runs by accident. Not the laughter, not the lighting, not even the way a chair is angled toward the fire. It all falls under her quiet command. She gestures for you to come closer, and you do, aware now of how each movement is noticed. Not judged exactly, but measured. That distinction matters. Judgment belongs to churches and newspapers. Measurement belongs to business. You will learn quickly, she says, and there is no softness in the words, only expectation, or you will not last. There is no threat in her tone which makes it more convincing. The house does not need to threaten you. It simply continues without you if you cannot keep pace. You keep tall. She begins outlining the rules, though she never calls them that. It sounds more like advice from someone who has watched enough women succeed and fail to lose patience for unnecessary suffering. You are to be punctual. You are to keep yourself clean. You are to avoid drinking too much, no matter how much a customer insists. You are to hand over the agreed portion of your earnings without argument. You are to treat other women in the house with a kind of careful neutrality because friendship is welcome but conflict is expensive. The truth quietly sitting behind all this is that many brothels in the American West operated under structured management. Madams often handled finances, negotiated with suppliers, paid bribes or fees when needed, and maintained order. Some even kept detailed account books. It was not chaos. It was commerce wearing silk. She continues pacing slowly now, her skirts whispering against the floorboards. You do not promise what you cannot deliver. You do not quarrel where others can hear. You do not embarrass a client. You do not embarrass yourself. If a man grows difficult, you signal. If a man grows dangerous, you leave. If you cannot leave, you call. There is something almost reassuring in the clarity. Outside, the world is unpredictable. Inside, at least, there are instruction. You notice a small bell on the wall near the staircase. It is polished, discreet, almost decorative. She follows your gaze. That she says is for when things go wrong. No further explanation is offered. None is needed. A faint ripple of laughter rises from the parlour as another customer arrives. The piano changes tune brighter now, something meant to suggest cheer rather than elegance. The house adjusts its mood the way a skilled performer shifts expression mid-scene. You begin to understand that emotion here is not entirely spontaneous. It is curated. One of the women, tall and pale with dark curls, pinned high, crosses the room, carrying a tray of glasses. She gives you a quick look, not unkind, not overly curious, just a flicker of recognition. Another new arrival, another story in progress. She moves with practiced ease, her balance perfect despite the uneven floorboards. That kind of grace you suspect was learned the hard way. The madam turns back to you. You will keep your room in order. You will keep yourself presentable. You will not bring trouble to my door. There it is again, my door, not our house, not this establishment. Ownership is never in doubt. A slightly unusual historical detail, one that rarely makes it into dramatic retellings, is that some madams were among the more financially independent women in their communities. They could own property-managed staff and accumulate wealth in ways that were difficult for many respectable women of the time. It is an uncomfortable fact because it complicates the neat moral categories people prefer. Power here does not look like virtue. Still, authority comes with its own demands. The madam must keep the peace, not just inside the house, but with the town beyond it. That means maintaining relationships with suppliers, with law enforcement, with local officials who may publicly condemn her trade while quietly accepting its economic benefits. It is a delicate balance, and she carries it without visible strain. She steps closer and adjusts the neckline of your borrowed dress with a small, efficient motion. Presentation matters, she says. Men pay for what they believe they see. You glance toward the mirror again. The reflection looks composed, almost confident. It is unsettling how quickly the surface changes. Beneath it, your thoughts are still catching up. From the hallway comes the sound of hushed conversation. Two women pass by, one whispering something that makes the other stifle a laugh. There is life here beyond the business, though. It threads through everything like a hidden seam. Shared jokes, quiet alliances, small acts of kindness. They exist, but they are rarely the main story. The madam hands you a small bottle. Use sparingly, she says. You uncork it and catch a faint floral scent, something light enough to suggest cleanliness rather than overwhelm the senses. Perfume, you realize, is not just decoration. It is strategy. Too much and it becomes cloying. Too little and the illusion fades. There is an ongoing discussion among historians about how much control madams truly exercise versus how much they were constrained by external pressures such as local laws, economic shifts, and social expectations. Some portray them as powerful businesswomen navigating a male-dominated environment. Others emphasize the limits placed on them by the very system they operated within. With most things in this world, the reality likely sits somewhere in between. The madam moves toward the doorway, then pauses. You will learn who to trust, she says almost as an afterthought. Do not hurry that lesson. Then she is gone, absorbed back into the rhythm of the house. You are left standing near the staircase, the small bottle of perfume in your hand. The murmur of voices rising and falling around you. The air feels thicker now, not unpleasant, but charged with purpose. Every person here has a role, and every role is tied to survival. A man at the far end of the room glances your way, not boldly, not yet, just a look curious, assessing. You feel it land, then move on. This is how it begins, not with declarations, but with glances. You take a breath, steadying yourself. The scent of the perfume lingers, faintly mixing with coal smoke and polished wood. Somewhere behind you, the bell remains silent, a small reassurance tucked into the wall. The house continues its careful dance, laughter here, a murmur there, the piano stitching it all together. You are part of it now, whether you feel ready or not. And as you stand there adjusting to the weight of new rules and quiet authority, you begin to understand that this place does not simply exist. It is maintained, shaped and guarded moment by a woman who knows exactly what it takes to keep the illusion alive. By the time the evening settles properly over the house, you have already discovered that getting dressed here is not a matter of vanity. It is labour. Delicate-looking labour, perhaps, but labour all the same. The other women speak of it with the same practical tone a ranch hand might use for saddling a horse or a cook for kneading bread. There is a sequence to it, a timing, a method, and if you get any of it wrong, the whole effect slips. You sit before the small mirror in your room, while one of the women, the pale one with dark curls, opens a drawer and begins sorting through brushes, ribbons, hairpins and jars. The drawer smells of powder starch and old perfume. She studies your face as if deciding what kind of evening it can be persuaded to have. Not your mood exactly, your face. Those are not always the same thing. Too much rouge and they think you are trying, she says. Too little and they think you're tired. This, you notice, is the kind of frontier wisdom nobody writes into moral pamphlets. She begins with your hair, brushing first long deliberate strokes that pull the road dust from it and lay it flat into shine. Then pinning, lifting, arranging. Hair in this world is architecture. It frames the face, lengthens the neck, suggests youth or poise or mischief according to the needs of the room. A loosened curl can imply softness. A severe coil can imply dignity. A ribbon can hint at girlishness for those foolish enough to pay extra for suggestion and sentiment. Every small choice carries meaning, whether you care for the meaning or not. Across the 19th century, women in prostitution often used fashion quite consciously to advertise status, attract customers, and create distinction from local wives or working women. That is the plain historical reality beneath all the silk and powder. Clothing mattered commercially. Bright colours, fine fabrics, jewellery, and elaborate hairstyles helped signal availability, style, and rank within the trade. Even in rough towns, appearance could mark the difference between higher and lower earnings. Your borrowed blue dress is laid out on the bed. In daylight, it looked respectable enough. Under lamplight, it takes on a richer glow, though the seams show strain if you look too closely. The woman helping you, who says her name is Mabel, though you suspect that may be negotiable, shakes out the skirts and inspects the bodice with the calm suspicion of someone who trusts garments less than weather. Then comes the corset. History has been slightly too cheerful about corsets in the hands of costume dramas. They're always being laced by giggling maids in rooms with good ventilation. Here, the experience is less romantic. You step into the thing and grip the bedpost while Mabel pulls. The laces tighten. Your waist narrows. Your ribs file a polite complaint with management. You exhale. She pulls again. Your posture changes whether you approve or not. Shoulders back, spine straighter, breathing shallower. It is not impossible, just deeply unpersuasive as leisure. Stand still, she murmurs. Easy for her to say. She's not the one being compressed into a better profit margin. Once the corset is set, the dress follows. Buttons hook smoothing at the hips, adjusting at the bust. A small fichu at the neckline softens the effect just enough. Then stockings, garters, boots. The whole arrangement transforms your body into a version of itself designed for display. Not false exactly, just edited. The Wild West has no photographers in this room, but it understands flattering angles all the same. On the washstand sits a tray of cosmetics. Face powder in a chipped porcelain dish, rouge in paper packets, a salve for lips, a burnt matchstick used to darken lashes or brows in a pinch. Nothing here resembles the glittering cosmetic empires of later centuries, yet women made use of what they had. Rice powder, starch, homemade rouges, purchased pomade, scent waters. In more prosperous houses, imported perfumes or branded products might appear. In poorer places, improvisation ruled. If civilization was thin on the frontier, beauty routines were often downright heroic. A curious little detail from the era is that some women reportedly used bits of beet juice, berry stain, or even red paper rubbed damp against the cheeks to bring colour to the face when proper rouge was too costly or unavailable. Frontier glamour, in other words, sometimes had the pantry involved. One imagines elegance by way of produce, which feels wonderfully American somehow. Mabel dabs powder along your forehead and nose, then steps back squinting. Less shine, she says, more mystery. That is another lesson. Beauty here is not only about looking pretty, it is about looking composed, scented, restful, more finished than the town outside. Men come in dusty from trails, mines, rail yards, offices and saloons. They want brightness that does not look harried. They want warmth without effort. They want the absurd comfort of believing this softness that simply exists untouched by the labour, which would be charming if it were not achieved by women standing in cramped rooms while someone tightens their laces and says things like, "Turn your chin a little." You're shown how to apply scent sparingly. A touch at the wrists, a touch near the throat. Not enough to shout across the room. Just enough to create a small private cloud when someone leans near. Orange blossom, rose, violet, maybe lavender if the house can get it. Perfume has to wage war against lamp oil, tobacco, kamuk, coal dust, whiskey, fumes, and the general frontier atmosphere which is forever trying to smell like stable hay and damp wood. It does its best. Then there are the hands, nails cleaned, cuticles pushed back as well as one can manage, a ring added if the look requires it. Gloves for the parlour, perhaps removed slowly later if theatre seems useful. You'd not realised until now how much of the body can be turned into storytelling. Sleeve length, glove button, the tilt of a hat. Even the way you sit in a chair can signal innocence, boldness, or some carefully arranged balance between the two. Specialists still differ on how much these elaborate beauty practices reflected the women's own tastes and self-expression and how much they were dictated by market pressures and customer fantasies. It was likely both. Some women surely enjoyed fashion cosmetics and self-presentation on their own terms. Others may have felt trapped inside an exhausting visual routine. Most probably occupied the muddled middle ground where adornment could be pleasure on one day and burden on the next. Downstairs, the piano shifts to something slower. You can hear a man laugh, then clear his throat as if he regrets having laughed so loudly. Glass clinks follow. The house is entering its most theatrical hours. Every woman upstairs is turning herself into atmosphere. Mabel fastens a pair of earrings at your ears. Tiny drops of paste stone that catch the light convincingly enough if no one gets suspicious and fetches a jeweller. She tilts your face toward the lamp. There she says, "Now you look expensive." Not happy, not safe, not yourself. Expensive! The word lingers. You stand and the corset reminds you immediately that standing is now a managed event. Your back is straight. Your chest lifted. Your centre of gravity has been politely rearranged. Walking in the dress takes concentration. Sitting in it requires planning. Breathing in it becomes a small discipline. There is elegance in the result, yes, but elegance built from tiny negotiations with discomfort. And yet when you catch sight of yourself in the mirror, you understand the power of it. The road dust is gone. The weary traveller from the first night has been softened into someone more luminous, more deliberate. The house has dressed you not only for business, but for transformation. This version of you belongs under lamplight. This version can smile before speaking. This version can make a chair seem inviting simply by taking it. In the hallway, another woman passes in crimson satin with black trim and a spray of ribbon at one shoulder. She smells faintly of heliotrope. Behind her trails the hush of silk against wallpaper. For a moment, the whole corridor feels like backstage at some odd frontier theatre, where the audience has muddy boots and too much cash in one pocket. You descend the stairs carefully. Each step asks something of the corset, the hem, the boots, the roll. The parlour opens beneath you in a pool of amber light. Men turn some subtly, some not. You feel their attention arrive in layers, beginning with colour, moving to shape, resting at last on the expression you have been taught to wear. Calm, pleasant, slightly amused, as if the evening might delight you if it behaves. No one sees the labour behind it, not the brushing, pinning, laying, powdering, adjusting, testing, and holding still, not the way your ribs still complain in whispers, not the way your shoulders already miss the careless slump of privacy. What they see is polish, ease, a woman apparently born to lamplight. And as you cross the room through tobacco haze, piano notes, the scent of perfume and warm upholstery, you begin to grasp that in this house beauty is never accidental. It is built by hand, tightened by lace, and sent downstairs to earn its keep. By the time the clocks in town begin losing confidence about the hour, you realise that the work itself is made as much of waiting as of anything else. The parlour teaches this quickly. At first glance it looks lively. Lamps glow. The piano persists. Men come and go in little waves. Glasses are poured. Chairs shift. Skirts murmur over carpets. But beneath that motion lies an odd stretched rhythm. A pause between knocks at the door. A silence after laughter. A whole economy balanced on moments when nothing happens, and you must still look as though everything might. You take your seat near the piano because that is where the madam wants you. Light catches your cheek there. Your dress reads well from across the room. You can be seen without appearing displayed too blatantly. This too is part of the craft. Not too eager. Not too aloof. A frontier woman in this line of work spends a surprising amount of time calibrating the distance between herself and a man's confidence. The first customer you truly notice tonight is a clerk or bookkeeper by the look of him. His cuffs are cleaner than most. His boots are polished but not new. He has the slightly pinched posture of a man who sits more than he rides, and when he removes his hat, he smooths his hair with the nervous care of someone who hopes grooming can stand in for ease. He takes a drink. He glances toward you. He glances away. He studies the fire as if it might advise him. You almost feel fond of him, which is dangerous in its own quiet way. The evening's labour, you discover, begins long before any door closes upstairs. There is greeting, assessing, deflecting, encouraging. There is conversation conducted in tones that flatter without promising too much. There is the art of making a man feel less alone, while revealing almost nothing that can be used against you later. This part of the work is social, theatrical, and exhausting in a very particular manner. It requires attention without attachment, interest without surrender, warmth rationed with professional care. In many Western brothels and parlour houses, women were expected not only to provide sexual services, but also to entertain drink with patrons, play cards, sing dance, or simply keep up pleasant conversation. Men often paid for company as much as for anything else. In isolated, male-heavy communities, companionship itself had value, and houses that could provide charm and gentility often earn more than those offering only speed and The clerk finally approaches. He asks if he may sit as if the room is a drawing room in Boston, and not a carefully managed house on a street that smells faintly of horse and cigar smoke. You incline your head and let him. He speaks first about the weather, which tells you he is frightened, and then about freight delays, which tells you his life is more monotonous than he had hoped. He asks where you are from. You offer the improved version of the answer, the one polished to a soft gleam upstairs. He accepts it gratefully. Men often do. They do not always want truth. They want something shaped enough to hold for an hour. Then comes bargaining, though it wears politeness like a waistcoat. Not every man pushes, but enough do that the house has procedures, prices established. Time is hinted at, if not discussed too crudely. Terms are implied. A woman learns quickly how to hear the small shifts in tone that mean trouble, stinginess, drunkenness, sentimentality, or the worst mixture of all four. The madam and the older women taught you the language of these signals, and now you begin to hear it in real time, like learning a tune by listening for the bass line instead of the melody. A smaller, stranger note from this world is that some women carried peppermint lozenges, cloves, or bits of licorice root in their pockets or tucked into reticules to freshen the breath between customers or after smoke-filled conversation. It is such a tiny, practical detail, and yet it opens the room completely. Not glamour in the abstract, but peppermint in a warm palm. Not legend, but the ordinary maintenance of a body expected to remain presentable through long hours under lamps. The clerk is followed by a cattle drover with sunburnt cheeks and the solid silence of a man who has spent more time with animals than chairs. Then a miner with black under his nails even after washing. Then a drummer, a travelling salesman, slick enough to seem cheerful and tired enough to seem honest. Each one brings a different weather into the room. Dust, cold air, tobacco, hair oil, nervous energy, bragging, loneliness disguised as banter. You begin to sense that the parlour is less a room than a tide pool into which the town washes itself after dark. The work comes in fits. Half an hour of chatter, a period upstairs, then back down again to sit, smile and seem untroubled. Another lull, another man at the door, another drink poured though you only sip. Women in these houses often had to manage alcohol carefully because customers might expect conviviality, but intoxication made everything more dangerous. Some learned to water drinks, swap glasses, or pretend to drink more than they did. Sobriety was not always a virtue here, but it was a survival skill. Researchers continue to disagree about how much downtime women in Western brothels truly had between clients, because conditions varied wildly by town season and the status of the house. In some places, women may have faced relentless demand during boom periods. In others, long stretches of waiting could define a night, leaving them suspended between alertness and boredom. That uncertainty shaped the texture of the work. One could be busy, then idle, then suddenly busy again before one's thoughts had settled. And boredom, let us be fair, deserves more attention in frontier history than it usually gets. Not the pleasant boredom of a rainy Sunday with a book and tea. The other kind, the watchful kind. The sort that creeps in while you hold the same graceful posture for too long and listen to the same stories from different mouths. Men tell you about cattle prices, bridge repairs, a brother back east, a horse that threw them a business opportunity that may be brilliant or absurd. Sometimes you nod so much your neck feels composed of clock springs. The room itself shifts as the hours pass. Early evening has a varnished brightness. Later comes the thicker mood when the fire burns lower and the lamp chimneys cloud slightly with soot. Perfume sits closer to the skin now, mingling with warm wool, stale cigar smoke and the sharp sweetness of spilled whiskey drying on polished wood. The piano player, if one can grant him that dignified title, grows lazier with tempo. The house exhales. Even the canary tucked somewhere beyond the parlour has fallen silent. You begin to feel the fatigue of being looked at. It is not simple tiredness, it is a peculiar wearing down that comes from staying legible. Your face must remain open enough to invite, guarded enough to protect. Your body must hold itself attractively. Your voice must stay soft even when your patience does not. You cannot simply slump into a chair and stare at nothing. Or rather you can, but only if the room is empty and no one important is watching. One of the older women, a blonde with a laugh like dry silk, leans close as she passes and whispers, "Save your energy for the quiet ones." Then she moves on. That advice lingers. Loud men announce themselves. Quiet ones require more reading. Near midnight the room thins for a while. A gust of cold sneaks in when the door opens for someone leaving. Outside the street sounds duller now. Fewer wagons, more distant voices. Somewhere a dog barks and is offended at being alive. You sit near the fire and warm your hands, careful not to spoil the line of your posture. The clerk has gone, the drover too. In their place comes a younger man with city cuffs and a face trying very hard to look older than it is. You see at once that tonight has not gone as he expected. Perhaps that is why he is here. And this is the hidden rhythm of the work. Not a constant parade of sensational moments as cheap novels later preferred, but a long sequence of human need arriving in different coats. A chair pulled out, a smile offered, a question answered, without answering too much, a staircase climbed, a descent repeated, waiting between each act like a held breath. When at last you steal a glance at the clock on the mantel, you are startled by how little and how much time has passed. The night has stretched, folded, and resumed so many times that ordinary hours no longer feel reliable. Your feet ache in your boots. Your stays remind you that ribs are not decorative. Your smile has become a garment worn almost as steadily as the dress itself. Still, the house hums on. A door opens. Upstairs, then closes. Someone laughs softly in the hall. The piano finds another tune and limps bravely into it. The lamps burn lower, more golden now than bright. Beyond the curtains, the frontier dark presses close to the windows, and you understand with a kind of sleepy clarity that much of this life is neither scandal nor romance. It is endurance arranged attractively under lamplight hour after hour, while the town comes in to borrow warmth and leaves you holding the bill in your bones. The man with the city cuffs lingers near the edge of the parlour as if unsure whether he has stepped into the right kind of story. You notice that hesitation immediately. It is different from the clerk's nervous politeness or the drover's quiet reserve. This is something else, a kind of expectation that has not been met yet. Perhaps he imagined something brighter, louder, more thrilling. Instead, he has found warmth, soft voices, and a room that asks him to sit before it dazzles. You tilt your head just slightly enough to invite but not insist. He takes the hint and crosses the room boots, careful on the carpet as if he fears leaving marks. When he speaks, his voice carries a trace of somewhere else. Not quite eastern, not quite southern. A traveller then, or someone trying to be. He tells you he's been on the road for weeks. He says it lightly, but the fatigue sits behind his eyes like a second expression. You nod. and for a moment you let your own attention soften. This is the part that surprises many people later when they try to describe women in your position. The work is not only about selling a moment, it is often about receiving stories that have nowhere else to go. Across frontier towns, letters were slow distances long and isolation common. Many men who entered brothels were not simply seeking pleasure. They were seeking company conversation or the temporary comfort of being heard. Diaries and personal accounts from the period sometimes reveal this quieter side of the trade where women spent as much time listening as anything else. The man speaks of dust storms, missed connections, a horse that nearly threw him outside a rail stop you have never heard of. He laughs at his own misfortune, but the laughter comes a little too quickly. You recognize the pattern already. Humour as a shield. It is a common currency here. You ask a question at the right time, not too deep, not too shallow. He relaxes just slightly, like a knot loosening in a rope. This is the skill no one writes songs about. The ability to make another person feel steady again, even if only for a short while. A curious detail that occasionally surfaces in accounts of the era is that some women kept small notebooks where they jotted down names, preferences, or fragments of conversation about regular clients, not for sentiment, but for memory. Remembering that a man preferred a certain drink or that he had a brother in Kansas could turn a brief interaction into something that felt personal on his next visit. In a business built on repetition, memory could be as valuable as beauty. The man beside you glances toward the piano where the player is attempting something lively with mixed success. Do you like music? He asks. You consider the question. Do you like it, or do you simply exist around it now? The distinction blurs quickly in a place like this. You answer in a way that pleases him. He smiles, and for a moment the room feels lighter. Across the parlour, another woman leans close to a miner, her hand resting lightly on his sleeve as she listens. Near the fire, the blonde with the dry silk laugh is dealing cards, her voice low and amused. The house is full of these small contained worlds, each conversation its own little island of attention. The man with the city cuffs lowers his voice. It must be interesting living here. There it is. The question that pretends not to be a question. You could answer honestly. You could say it is tiring, complicated, sometimes dull, sometimes sharp with risk. You could say it feels like standing in a doorway that never quite closes, but that is not what he is asking for. So you give him something shaped. It keeps things from being dull, you say with a faint smile. He laughs relieved. The illusion holds. There has long been discussion among researchers about how much emotional labour was expected of women in this trade. Some interpretations emphasize the transactional nature of the work, while others highlight the interpersonal demands, the constant performance of empathy, charm, and attentiveness. The truth likely includes both shifting depending on the house, the clientele, and the individual woman. The man studies your face for a moment, as if trying to decide how much of you is real. You hold his gaze just long enough to feel genuine, then let it drift. This is another balance you are learning. Too much attention can feel like scrutiny. Too little can feel like indifference. The space between is where the work lives. He asks your name, the new one, and you give it without hesitation now. It sits more comfortably than it did an hour ago. Names like dresses begin to fit with wear. He tells you his own name, and you tuck it away. Whether you will need it again you cannot yet say, but remembering costs nothing and forgetting can cost more than one might expect. From somewhere down in the hall comes the faint sound of the canary again, a small bright note that seems almost out of place in the thick evening air. It reminds you briefly of mornings, of places where windows open onto something other than an alley, or a street full of restless footsteps. The thought passes quickly. There is no time for it to linger. The man leans back in his chair, his posture loosening. It's quieter than I thought, he says. You glance around. The room hums softly, but he is not wrong. The chaos of the outside world has been softened, here filtered through curtains and careful voices. This is part of what he is paid for, whether he realizes it or not. Not silence exactly, but a gentler version of noise. A less commonly mentioned aspect of these environments is how carefully sound was managed. Heavy curtains, rugs, and upholstered furniture helped absorb noise, creating a more controlled atmosphere. It was not soundproof by any means, but it was enough to make the house feel distinct from the rawness of the street. The man shifts closer, his earlier uncertainty fading. The conversation has done its work. The next step approaches not abruptly, but with the quiet inevitability of something already agreed upon without needing to be spoken aloud. You rise together, and the room barely notices. That too is part of the design. Movements in and out of the parlour are meant to feel natural, almost unremarkable. No grand exits, no sudden attention, just the steady flow of business wrapped in the appearance of ease. As you guide him toward the staircase, you are aware of the many layers that brought you here. The dress, the posture, the practiced conversation, the careful listening. None of it accidental, all of it necessary. Halfway up the stairs, he pauses, glancing back at the room as if committing it to memory. You follow his gaze. The fire, the piano, the women moving through their roles with quiet precision. It looks almost peaceful from this angle. Then he turns and you continue upward. The hallway greets you with softer light and a different kind of silence. The sounds of the parlour fade, replaced by the muffled rhythm of footsteps, doors opening and closing. The occasional murmur of voices behind walls. This is where the performance changes shape, where the public version of the evening gives way to something more contained. You lead him to one of the rooms, your step steady despite the long hours already settling into your bones. The door closes behind you with a familiar, gentle finality, and as the night continues its slow unfolding, you begin to understand that what men seek here is rarely as simple as they claim. It is not only pleasure, it is not only escape, it is more often than they would admit a brief refuge from the weight of their own lives. And you for a time become part of that refuge. When you come back downstairs, the house has shifted into its later mood, that softer, heavier stretch of night when everything looks a little more expensive and a little more tired at the same time. The lamps have burned lower. The piano has given up on cheerfulness and settled into something slow and sentimental. A faint haze hangs in the parlour now, part coal smoke, part cigar smoke, part the accumulated breath of too many conversations. The room feels used but still carefully arranged, rather like the people in it. You take your place again, and almost at once the practical side of the evening returns. Not romance, not intrigue, arithmetic. Money enters this world in little flashes. A folded bill, a few coins pressed into a gloved hand, payment settled with the madam in the hall. Charges added for drinks, for rooms, for time, for damaged goods, for borrowed dresses, for laundry, for perfumes, for doctor visits, for the vague category of expenses that seems to expand whenever profit threatens to look real. The house has velvet curtains, yes, but behind them sits a ledger with a very hard face. Women in Western brothels could earn far more than many other working women of the era, at least on paper. That is an important truth. Wages for domestic servants, seamstresses, laundresses, and factory workers were often very low, while prostitution might bring in significantly larger sums, especially in boomtowns full of cash-rich miners, cattle buyers, railroad men, or speculators. But earnings and savings were not the same thing. Expenses were relentless, and many women saw far less of their income than outsiders imagined. The blonde woman with the dry silk laugh who tells you tonight that you may call her Ada sits beside you with a little notebook in her lap. It is not elegant, just a small thing with worn edges and cramped handwriting. She does not bother hiding it. "Best friend you'll ever have," she says, tapping the cover. You glance at the columns inside, names or aliases, amounts, dates, notes. It looks strangely respectable, like something a shopkeeper might keep if the shopkeeper sold illusions and patience by the hour. Ada explains in a low voice that if you do not count every coin, everyone else will do the counting for you. The house takes its share. The laundress charges more than you think reasonable because lace and ruffles are fussy things. Dress repairs cost money. Hairpins disappear. Stockings wear out. Soap is never as cheap as one wants. Good perfume is worse. Cheap perfume is a false economy because it gives you a headache and makes customers think of their aunt's linen cupboard. Then there are the drinks men insist on buying, some of which you are expected to accept with gratitude even if the house keeps part of the price. you begin to see the pattern. Prophet arrives dressed up for the evening and slips out the barrel's back door before dawn. A small but telling detail from the period is that some women sewed coins into hems, tucked them into mattress seams, or hid them in powder boxes to keep cash out of reach of thieves' drunken companions or predatory managers. Frontier banking was not always convenient, and privacy could be hard to come by. A hem, it turns out, was as good a savings account as any if nobody noticed it clinking. The thought makes you glance down at your own skirt with sudden professional interest. Ada continues, "If you break a glass, it may be charged to you. If a customer ruins a sheet and the madam is in a poor mood, that may somehow become your concern too. If you need a new dress advanced on credit, the debt is noted. If you fall sick and cannot work, the room may still cost money. In theory, high earnings make all this manageable. In practice, the frontier has a genius for turning income into vapour. There is also the matter of status. A woman in a parlour house may command better prices than a woman in a crib or dance hall, but she also has to maintain a more elaborate appearance, better dresses, better grooming, more polished manners. Refinement is expensive, which feels almost rude when you put it so plainly. But there it is. Looking prosperous often requires spending like it. Writers who study the economics of prostitution in the 19th century do not always agree on how much financial independence women could realistically achieve. Some point to women who bought property, invested in businesses, or left behind sizable estates. Others stress the instability of earnings, the burden of debt, and the many ways money could be siphoned off before it became lasting security. Much depended on the woman, the town, the management, and whether luck decided to behave for a season. You ask Ada whether anyone ever truly gets ahead. She gives you a look that is half amused, half pitying. Sometimes she says, usually they do not announce it. Then she tells you about a woman she once knew in Montana who bought 2 lots under another name and later opened a boarding house. Whether this story is entirely true, mostly true, or improved with repetition is hard to tell. Frontier storytelling often wears a better coat every time it leaves the closet. Still, the possibility lingers. Property, a business, a door that locks from the inside and belongs to you. Across the room, the madam sits at a side table with a ledger open beside her elbow. She smiles at a customer while her fingers rest lightly on the page, as if tenderness and arithmetic are perfectly compatible. In this house, apparently they are. The hours continue, and with them the small metallic rhythm of money changing form. Not just coins, but percentages, obligations, deductions. You begin to understand why some women accepted gifts from favoured customers, jewellery, fabric, even furniture, because cash was not the only way to build a cushion. A ring could be pawned. A bolt of good cloth could become a dress. A customer with a dry goods store might be more wasteful than one with poetic eyes. There is another layer to all this too, risk. Money made quickly can disappear quickly in places where theft, fire, illness, and local crackdowns hover like weather systems. A parlour house might seem stable one month and be emptied the next by scandal, epidemic, economic bust, or a righteous new mayor who suddenly discovers morality right before an election. A fresh customer enters, hat low, shoulders broad, the smell of cold air and horses arriving with him. You notice almost without trying the quality of his coat, the leather of his gloves, the weight of his boots, the ease with which he handles payment at the desk. The house trains the eye. Money becomes visible in gestures long before it appears in hand. Ada murmurs that miners after a good strike can be generous for exactly 1 week and impossible for the next 3. Railroad men are sometimes reliable travelling salesmen, often boast local officials expect discretion, as if they invented it, and cowboys may have charm where they lack cash. Never mistake noise for wealth, she adds. That is a beginner's error. You store that away with the peppermint trick and the lesson about quiet men. The parlour smells different now than it did earlier. Less floral, more worn in. Powder and perfume still hover, but beneath them you catch the scent of warm lamp oil, damp wool steaming gently by the fire, and polished wood touched by many hands. The room is handsome, but the night has rubbed its thumb across the finish. You think about the road that brought you here and how simple the idea of earnings once sounded. Make enough money, get safe, start over. Yet every coin in this world seems to arrive already claimed by 5 separate needs: food, rent, clothing, cleanliness, a little savings if luck is merciful, maybe a little softness too, a rib and a better comb, a pair of gloves that make you feel less temporary. Even hope has a budget. Later, when the flow of customers slows for a little while, Ada shows you where she keeps a few hidden notes tucked inside the lining of an old reticule. Not much, but enough that she smiles when she touches them. Real money. Secret money, money with a future attached to it. That is different from tonight's earnings, which are still busy becoming tomorrow's expenses. You find the idea oddly soothing. Not the scarcity of it, but the intent. To hide away a little corner of possibility. To make some small, private arrangement with the future in a place that profits from the immediate. The madam closes her ledger for the moment, and the sound of the cover meeting paper carries farther than you would expect. Firm, final. It reminds you that every laugh in this house is shadowed by accounting. Every rustle of silk, every poured drink, every candle-lit smile has numbers attached. And as you sit beneath the fading glow of the lamps, hearing the piano stumble through another tune, and feeling the weight of borrowed fabric on your skin, you realize that money here is never just money. It is rent, leverage, bait, hope, camouflage, escape, and sometimes only enough of those to keep you in place one more night. By the time the hour grows so late that even the most determined laughter begins to sound borrowed, your body starts keeping a second kind of account. Not coins this time, but aches, irritations, little flashes of worry. The corset has left its opinion on your ribs. Your feet have developed a deep philosophical objection to fashion. Your cheeks still hold their careful colour, but beneath the powder your skin feels warm and slightly tight from lamp heat and long attention. And under all of that quieter but more persistent is the matter of health. The house does not speak of it openly in the parlour. Health belongs to the upstairs world, to basins and bottles and lowered voices, but it is never far away. In a place like this, where strangers pass through nightly with stories, dust habits, and hidden troubles, the body becomes both livelihood and source of unease. You begin to notice how often the women mention tiredness, headaches, fever, soreness, digestion, sleep. Not dramatically, just practically. Health here is not an abstract blessing, it is a daily negotiation with circumstance. Many Western towns, especially the larger and more established ones, tried in one way or another to regulate prostitution through health inspections, medical ordinances, or unofficial arrangements with local doctors. The results were uneven, often invasive, and rarely as protective as advertised. Still, the concern was real. Disease was feared not only inside brothels but across the wider community, and authorities sometimes focused intensely on women in the trade, while paying far less attention to the men who visited them. A familiar pattern, really. Society loves to appoint one half of a problem and call it the whole thing. You first sense this hidden machinery when the madam sends you near dawn not to bed but to the little back sitting room where a doctor sometimes calls. The room smells of camphor, starch, extinguished candles, and old upholstery. A lamp burns low on the side table. There is a narrow couch, a washstand, and a shelf lined with bottles whose labels promise relief, with the confident handwriting of the 19th century. Relief from nerves, relief from female weakness, relief from biliousness, relief from disorders too vague to be useful and too common to ignore. Ada is there before you, perched on the edge of the couch with one boot off, and her stockinged foot wrapped in a cloth. "Blister," she says by way of explanation. Not dying yet? That alone is oddly comforting. The doctor, when he arrives, looks tired enough to be honest. Middle-aged, whiskered, smelling faintly of soap, winter air, and medicinal alcohol. He carries a black bag with the solemn dignity of a travelling clergyman, except his sermons come in liquid form. He greets the madam with the familiarity of someone who has visited often, though both of them keep the tone carefully professional. Discretion is one of the house's more valuable furnishings. The truth of frontier medicine is not specially soothing. Doctors varied enormously in training and skill. Some were competent and experienced. Some were improvisers with confidence and a decent coat. Some were both. Medical knowledge in the 19th century was advancing, but patchily in access on the frontier could be limited. Women in prostitution lived with that uncertainty every day. Illness threatened income, reputation, comfort, and sometimes survival itself. The doctor inspects Ada's foot, recommends rest she plainly will not take, then turns to the bottles on the shelf. Liniment, salve, tonic, laudanum, perhaps, though the house keeps that under tighter control. Patent remedies were everywhere in this era, and they thrived on grand promises and vague labels. A woman could be sold drops, powders, syrups, bitters, and pills for almost anything. Some worked a little, some worked not at all. Some were mostly alcohol, opium, or optimism, which in fairness has rescued many a product line. An odd little detail from the period is that some women believed strongly in sulphur tucked into stockings, sachets of herbs pinned inside clothing, or even particular charms against sickness and bad luck. Not because they were foolish, but because when medicine is uncertain and danger is invisible, people build small rituals of control. A clove of garlic, a lucky brooch, a silver coin carried close to the skin. Call it superstition if you like. Most human beings become surprisingly poetic when frightened. You sit while the doctor asks a few questions in a tone meant to sound detached. Have you been sleeping, eating, feeling feverish? Any pain? Any sign of infection? The questions are brisk, but the room itself fills the gaps between them with embarrassment. Not yours exactly, or not only yours, rather a social embarrassment. A whole culture's discomfort gathered into one lamplit room before dawn. Everyone knows why these questions matter. Everyone would prefer not to say so too plainly. Interpretations differ on how effective these periodic medical examinations actually were in frontier vice districts. Some historians see them as a serious, if flawed, public health measure shaped by limited knowledge and moral double standards. Others stress how performative or punitive they could become, aimed more at controlling women than at addressing the wider realities of disease transmission. Both readings fit the evidence in frustrating ways. The West had a gift for doing practical things with self-righteous expressions. The doctor finally gives you a small paper packet of powder for fatigue and tells you to drink more water, which sounds wise and deeply inconvenient. Water must be heated, carried, poured, and guarded from contamination in a house full of traffic. Still you nod because resistance would not improve the prescription. After he leaves, the women begin their own quieter medicine. Advice passes from chair to chair like contraband. Rest your feet in cool water if you can. Avoid too much drink. Keep your own comb. Do not borrow cosmetics carelessly. Wash when you're able, even if only quickly. Keep peppermint or clove for the mouth. Use vinegar for certain stains. Use cold cloths for headaches. Keep a little money aside for proper treatment because free advice may be plentiful, but a decent doctor still expects cash. This female network of practical knowledge may matter as much as the doctor's bag. In many brothels and boarding houses, women shared remedies, warning signs, herbal mixtures, household treatments, and stories of what had helped before. Some of it came from mothers, some from immigrant traditions, some from sheer trial and error. It was informal medicine, yes, but often immediate and attentive in ways official systems were not. Mabel swears by horehound for coughs and a splash of whiskey on the gums for tooth pain, though she admits the second remedy may improve the patient mainly by improving her attitude. Ada insists on mustard plasters for chest complaints. Another woman claims onion syrup fixes almost anything short of heartbreak. You suspect heartbreak would merely smell worse afterward. The room warms with this exchange as if shared complaint itself generates comfort. Their voices soften. Hair comes down. Pins are removed and dropped into little dishes with a steady metallic patter. Without the fully arranged faces and fitted smiles of the parlour, the women seem both younger and more worn and somehow more real, in a way that makes the house feel briefly less like a stage. You learn too that fear is not always dramatic. It does not always announce itself with tears or trembling. Sometimes it is just a pause before sleep, a glance at a rash, a wince ignored too long, a bottle tilted to see how much remains, a day counted, a month remembered. Health anxiety on the frontier often lives in these small repetitive acts, the constant scanning of a body that must continue earning whether it feels like it or not. By the time you return to your room, the sky beyond the alley window has begun to pale at the edges, not sunrise yet, but the promise of it. The house is quieter now, somewhere a floorboard settles, somewhere a basin is emptied. You unlatch your dress with careful fingers and feel the first relief of loosened stays, that extraordinary breath when your ribs realize the war is temporarily over. On the washstand sits your reflection blurred slightly in the spotted mirror. Powder fading, hair loosening, eyes more tired than the rest of your face admits. Beside the picture stands the little paper packet from the doctor, absurdly small against the size of your thoughts. You touch it, then leave it where it is, because this too belongs to the life. Not just the lamplight and practiced laughter, but the tonics, the whispered remedies, the backroom consultations, the uneasy truce between commerce and the fragile human body. Outside the town still dreams of gold cattle railroads and progress. Inside, women count pulse, pain, rest, and risk with equal seriousness. And as dawn slowly rinses the darkness from the alley bricks, you understand that survival here depends not only on beauty or charm or cleverness, but on keeping a body going in a world that keeps asking it for more than it was ever meant to give. Morning arrives not with ceremony, but with a kind of quiet surrender. The house exhales. The last customer has long since drifted out into the thinning dark, and what remains is the softer, more honest version of the place. Lamps are extinguished one by one. The piano sits closed, relieved of its duties. Chairs stand slightly askew, as if they too are tired of pretending. Even the curtains seem to loosen, no longer required to flatter anyone. You wake later than you expect, the light in your room pale and indirect through the alley window. It is not the bright, cheerful sort of morning described in letters back east. It is a washed-out daylight filtered through dust and distance, carrying with it the faint sounds of wagons already at work, boots on boardwalks, someone calling out to a mule that refuses to cooperate. The town never truly rests. It only changes tone. Your body takes stock before your mind does, a stiffness along your shoulders, a lingering pressure where the corset had been, feet that protest when they meet the floor. You sit on the edge of the bed for a moment, letting yourself adjust, feeling the quiet return of your own shape now that the night's architecture has been removed. The basin on your washstand waits along with the pitcher of water that has cooled overnight. You test it with your fingers, cold enough to wake you properly. Washing here is not a casual act, it is deliberate. Water must be carried heated, conserved. Cleanliness is not assumed, it is achieved. Across much of the 19th century, frontier access to regular bathing facilities was limited. Even in established towns, indoor plumbing was rare, and water had to be hauled from wells, rivers, or communal sources. In houses like this, efforts were made to maintain standards that would appeal to customers, but those efforts required constant work. Clean sheets, fresh water, scrubbed floors, laundered garments, all of it done by hand, all of it repeated endlessly. You pour the water into the basin and begin the slow process of washing. Face first, neck, arms, careful, methodical movements. The soap smells faintly of lye and something floral that tries to soften the edge. You notice how much of last night lingers on your skin. Powder perfumes smoke the touch of too many small moments layered together. Washing becomes not just hygiene, but a kind of reset, a way to reclaim your own surface. A detail that rarely appears in romantic retellings is how much effort went into simply managing water in these environments. Buckets carried upstairs, pitchers refilled, towels wrung out and hung to dry. In some houses, bathing might be arranged in tin tubs brought into rooms, the water heated over stoves and carried in stages. It was labour-intensive and often shared, which added its own layer of awkwardness and routine. You dress more simply for the day, a looser bodice, a skirt that does not demand such careful posture, your hair left in a braid or pinned without ceremony. Daytime in the house is quieter, less theatrical. The performance rests, though it never fully disappears. Downstairs, the parlour looks almost unfamiliar in daylight. The colours are less forgiving. The gilt mirror reveals its flaws. The carpet shows its wear. Without the glow of lamps and the softening effect of evening, the room feels smaller, more practical. The magic has not vanished exactly. It has simply been folded away until needed again. In the kitchen, you find a different kind of life. Coffee brewing, bread sliced, someone stirring a pot with slow, thoughtful movements. The women gather here in ones and twos, their voices lower, their laughter easier. Without customers present, the house breathes differently. There is less need to shape every word, less need to hold every gesture in place. Ada sits at the table, her notebook closed for once, a cup of coffee warming her hands. She nods as you enter. You made it through your first proper night, she says, as if marking a quiet milestone. You take a seat, grateful for the solidity of the chair, the warmth of the cup placed before you. Coffee here is not delicate. It is strong, slightly bitter, and very welcome. The smell alone feels grounding, cutting through the lingering sense of perfume and smoke. There is a practical rhythm to these morning hours. Dresses mended, stockings inspected, hair brushed out and rebraided. Small repairs made before they become larger problems. The house runs on maintenance as much as it does on performance. Some observers of the time noted that brothels often maintained higher standards of cleanliness than many other frontier establishments precisely because their business depended on it. While conditions varied widely, the need to present an appealing environment pushed some houses to invest in regular laundering, cleaning and upkeep in ways that were not always matched in saloons or boarding houses. Mabel enters with a bundle of linens, her arms full, her expression focused. Laundry day, she announces, as if it were a holiday no one asked for. She begins sorting sheets with practiced efficiency, checking for stains where anything that might require extra attention. The work is unglamorous, but it is essential. Clean linens are not just a comfort. They are part of the house's reputation. You offer to help, and she shows you how to fold, how to inspect, how to separate what can be reused from what must be washed again. The fabric feels different in daylight. Less mysterious, more honest. A small, almost surprising habit you notice is that some women add a few drops of scent to the rinse water for linens, not enough to overpower, just enough to leave a faint trace. It is a subtle touch, but in a place where atmosphere matters, even the smallest details are considered. Conversation drifts as you work. Not about the night just past, at least not directly. Instead, talk turns to ordinary things. A new shipment of fabric expected next week. A rumour about a neighbouring town, a complaint about the price of soap. These small topics create a sense of continuity, a reminder that life here is not only defined by what happens after dark. There is also rest, though it comes in fragments. A moment by the window, a brief nap in a chair, time taken to sit without performing, to let your face settle into its natural expression. These pauses are necessary. Without them, the night would have no boundary. As the morning stretches toward an afternoon, the house begins preparing again, almost without anyone announcing it. Dresses are chosen. Hair is planned. The quiet work of transformation resumes in subtle ways. The cycle is constant, but it does not feel mechanical, more like breathing. Inhale, exhale. Day-night. Preparation, performance, recovery. You find yourself at the window for a moment, looking out into the alley. The light has strengthened. The town is fully awake now. Wagons pass. Voices carry. Somewhere a hammer strikes again, steady and persistent. The same sounds you heard when you first arrived, but now they feel slightly different. Familiar, perhaps, or at least less distant. Behind you, the house stirs with purpose. The parlour will soon be set again, lamps cleaned, furniture straightened. The piano tuned as much as it ever is. The illusion rebuilt piece by piece. You turn back from the window, aware now of how each part of the day connects to the next. The washing, the mending, the quiet conversations, the brief rest. All of it leading toward another evening, another series of moments that will blur together and then fade. And as you move through the steady practical tasks of the day, you begin to understand that life here is not divided neatly into work and rest, into performance and reality. It is a continuous thread woven from small acts of care, effort and endurance, each one necessary, each one part of keeping the whole thing moving forward. By late afternoon, the house has settled into that in-between hush you only notice once you have lived inside it for a little while. The morning chores are mostly done. The evening performance has not yet begun. The lamps are still unlit. The piano closed the curtains half drawn against the glare. In this pause, the place feels less like a business and more like a strange temporary village made entirely of women who did not expect to live together and now know one another's footsteps by sound. You begin to see how much of life here happens in the cracks between official hours. Mabel sits on the floor near the parlour sofa with a sewing basket tipped open beside her. Ada is by the window darning a glove with the expression of someone repairing a personal insult. The blonde with the dry silk laugh, whose real name may or may not be Clara depending on the day, is brushing out another woman's hair while offering advice nobody requested, and everyone seems to enjoy anyway. The room smells of threadwax coffee gone slightly stale in the pot face powder, and the clean, sharp scent of soap from laundry drying upstairs. No customers, no poses, no need for anyone to pretend that sitting with stockings half mended is mysterious. It would be easy later for people to imagine a house like this as a nest of rivalry from floor to ceiling, all jealous glances and sharpened smiles. Rivalry certainly exists. How could it not in a place where attention becomes money and beauty is treated like inventory? But that is not the whole truth, and perhaps not even the most important part. These women borrow hairpins, share remedies, pass warnings in whispers, mend one another's bodices, and notice when someone has gone too quiet. Whatever else the house is, it is also a place where women learn the daily weather of one another's moods. Women in brothels often formed close social networks because they lived and worked in unusually intimate conditions, shared space, shared risk, shared routines, and the need for practical support could foster friendships that were deep, durable, and emotionally significant. Letters, memoirs and local recollections sometimes hint at this hidden community, even when official records flatten the women into a single category. Mabel bites off a thread with her teeth and looks up at you. "Come here," she says. "Your sleeve hem is trying to disgrace you." You sit and she turns your cuff inside out with the efficiency of a field surgeon. It is slightly coming undone. You had not noticed. Of course you had not noticed. One cannot spend a full night being looked at and still remain attentive to every traitorous stitch. She repairs it while talking about nothing in particular. A new pair of boots she once owned in St. Louis. A customer last month who smelled strongly of onions and philosophy. A dog she used to feed scraps to behind another house in another town. The subjects wander freely and somehow that is part of the comfort. Ada snorts from the window. The philosopher was the one with the hat too small for his head. No, Mabel says. That was the man with the pocket watch and no common sense. The room warms with laughter. It is mild laughter, not the parlour kind, not polished for effect. This is the softer stuff, lower in pitch, full of recognition. You had not realised until now how hungry you were for it. A tiny but revealing detail from some vice districts is that women sometimes exchanged nicknames entirely separate from their working names. Little private names used only in the kitchen, on the stairs or behind closed doors. Names that did not belong to customers, madams, clerks or lawmen. It is such a small thing, but it tells you a great deal. A person can live under one name in public, another in business, and a third among those who have seen her take out hairpins at the end of a long night. You are beginning to collect those private maps too. Ada hates cardamom but loves lemon drops. Mabel cannot sleep through thunderstorms but will deny this even under oath. Clara talks endlessly when upset and goes nearly silent when truly hurt. The red-haired woman downstairs who introduces herself to patrons with a polished smile always keeps one of her mother's recipes folded in a bodice pocket, though she has not cooked it in years. These facts are not marketable, they do not appear in ledgers. Yet they are what make the house feel inhabited rather than arranged. That does not mean everything is tender, By evening yesterday, one woman had refused to lend another a comb, and the disagreement carried enough edge to chill the hallway for an hour. Dresses are borrowed and returned late. Customers show preferences. Comparisons are made, if not always allowed. Age enters the room before anyone invites it. So does luck. One woman may have a profitable week while another sits too often by the fire with an untouched glass smiling at men who choose someone else. It would be dishonest to pretend affection simply dissolves all of that. Commentators have long disagreed over how supportive these female communities really were. Some emphasize solidarity born from shared circumstances. Others point to competition isolation and the emotional strain of life in the trade. The evidence suggests both. Friendships could be genuine and sustaining, yet still live beside envy, mistrust, and periodic cruelty. Human beings, irritatingly enough, are seldom only one thing. Clara finishes brushing the other woman's hair and begins pinning it back up loosely for the evening. "Hold still," she murmurs. "You fidget like a church child." "I was a church child," comes the reply. "That explains nothing." Again the room softens with laughter. "You help fold linens while they talk." Someone mentions a town in Colorado where the winter crack wash basins if you left water in them too long. Someone else remembers a madam in Dodge who insisted on fresh flowers, even when flowers cost a ridiculous amount and wilted by supper. Another swears she once lived in a house where a tame magpie stole earrings and hid them behind the coal scuttle. The story may be embroidered. Then again, embroidery is practically a house custom. It strikes you listening that memory itself behaves differently here. Women do not always tell their lives in order. They offer fragments. A river crossing, a cousin in Ohio, dress ruined in a thunderstorm, a fairground in Illinois, a pair of gloves bought with the first money they truly called their own. The shape of a former self emerges from these pieces, but never fully. Perhaps that is safer. Perhaps it is simply how people speak when they know too much of the past can ache, if handled carelessly. Later in the upstairs hall, Ada stops you before your door and presses 2 buttons into your palm. Pearl-coloured, slightly mismatched. "For that blue dress," she says, before it sheds itself in public. You look at them then at her, "Thank you." She shrugs. Better the dress veil in private than the parlour. Kindness often arrives here dressed as practicality. As dusk begins to gather, the house stirs back toward business. The kitchen quiets. The sewing baskets close. Hair is redone. Faces are washed and remade. Yet something from the afternoon remains. Not softness exactly, more like a hidden seam of it, enough to carry into the evening. When you sit before the mirror upstairs, Mabel appears behind you with a ribbon. "Turn," she says, and ties it at your shoulder with brisk fingers. She does not ask whether you want it. She has already decided it will suit the dress. Then she steps back, considers, and nods once with satisfaction. In another world, perhaps women might have known one another at teas, church socials, schoolrooms, shared gardens. Here they know one another by the scrape of chairs after midnight, by the look in someone's eyes when a customer is wrong for the house, by who can braid hair fastest, who cries when feverish, who lies badly, who keeps everyone's secrets and who only keeps her own. It's not the gentlest form of intimacy, but it is intimacy all the same. Downstairs, someone opens the piano. A note sounds, then another. The first lamps are lit one by one, and the familiar amber glow begins to return to the parlour. The performance is almost ready to resume. Before you go down, Clara catches your wrist lightly and dusts a touch more powder at your collarbone. There, she says, "Now you look as if you have never worried a day in your life." You nearly laugh, because they know better. All of them do. They have seen one another, worried, tired, cross-sick, vain, brave, petty, generous, frightened, and funny. They have seen the version of each other that appears under gaslight and the version that sits barefoot on the kitchen floor sorting stockings. They have seen enough to puncture illusion, and still in their uneven way they help each other build it again. And as you descend toward the evening with the house humming awake around you, you realize that behind these closed doors, friendship is rarely sentimental and almost never simple, but it can be as necessary as soap, as steadying as coffee, and sometimes the only thing that makes the long nights feel survivable. By now you have learned that a room can change its temperature without the fire ever being touched. Sometimes it happens when a wealthy customer walks in and everyone quietly recalculates the evening. Sometimes it happens when the sheriff appears and pretends he's only passing by. And sometimes it happens when a woman from the Chinese Quarter or a Mexican dance hall or a black boarding house district is mentioned by one of the men in the parlour, with that particular tone people use when they want the pleasures of the world without granting it dignity. Then the air shifts, not dramatically, no one overturns a chair, but everyone in the house feels it. The Wild West, despite all its myths of rough equality and second chances, is deeply structured by race, class, language and respectability. Frontier towns were more diverse than old films like to admit. Chinese immigrants, Mexican and Mexican-American communities, black settlers and workers, indigenous women, European immigrants from every direction, all moved through these places, worked in them, built them, suffered in them, and the sex trade reflected that same uneven world. Women did not enter it on equal terms. They did not work under equal conditions. They were not judged by equal standards. The house teaches this lesson indirectly at first, then all at once. Ada tells you one afternoon while darning a glove by the window that the best room in a house is never only about wallpaper. It is about who is allowed to be seen in it, she says. That is the whole secret of American society, if you ask me. No one asked her, but no one disagrees either. The simplest truth here is also one of the hardest to sit with. White women in higher-end parlour houses often had access to better earning potential, better furnishings, more legal cover and more social ambiguity than women of colour or poorer immigrant women working in rougher districts. That does not mean white women were safe or respected. It means the ladder itself was crooked before anyone climbed it. You begin to notice how class and race are discussed in the coded language of the house. Refined, common, foreign, nice girls, rough trade, a good house, that part of town. So much of frontier speech is really geography wearing perfume. Streets become categories. Curtains become status. Accent becomes destiny. One evening, a customer, a railman with too much confidence and not enough charm, asks whether the house has Spanish girls. He says it as if requesting oysters. The madame's smile does not falter, but it grows cooler by a degree so small only the women seem to notice. "This is the house you're in," she says, which is not an answer, and very much is one. The 19th century West had racially segregated vice districts in many places, whether by custom, violence, economics, or local policy. Chinese women, Mexican women, black women and indigenous women were often pushed into harsher conditions, lower pay, and more direct forms of surveillance or exploitation. Newspapers described them differently. Police treated them differently. Clients approached them with different fantasies and cruelties. Respectability, even false respectability, was distributed unequally. A strange little detail, though telling, is that some dance halls and brothels advertised women by ethnicity in posters, gossip, or coded phrases, passed among men as though nationality itself were part of the decor. French, Spanish, Creole, Mexican, Chinese. Sometimes these labels were accurate. Often they were exaggerated, blurred, or invented outright because exoticism sold. Identity could be marketed, distorted, and consumed all in one breath. You hear this distortion in the way men talk after a few drinks. One wants novelty, another wants to boast, another wants the thrill of crossing a line he publicly condemns. The house listens, remembers, and prices accordingly. Desire here is not innocent. It comes carrying the prejudices of the street right up onto the carpet. Mabel once worked briefly in a cheaper district near a rail stop where the women came from half a dozen countries and the men pronounced none of the names correctly. She tells you that language itself could be a form of ranking. A woman who spoke polished English could be treated as more elegant than a woman who spoke accented English, even when both were equally skilled, equally careful, equally tired. The men heard class before they heard sense, she says. Sounds like a joke until you realize it is not. There is also the matter of immigration and debt. Some women arrived in western towns already trapped by the contract's transport costs or networks of coercion that made freedom more theoretical than real. Others moved more independently, but still found that being foreign visibly poor or outside local ideas of whiteness narrowed their choices sharply. A woman might be marketable and marginalized at the same time desired and degraded in one glance. Frontier society excelled at such contradictions. Interpretations remained divided over how much mobility women of different racial and ethnic backgrounds could achieve within Western vice economies. Some case studies reveal women who built businesses moved up in status or carved out local influence despite the barriers around them. Other evidence shows rigid ceilings that money alone could not break. Local context mattered enormously. A woman might be tolerated in one town, harassed in the next, and erased from the record in both. The house itself is not free of these hierarchies, even when it pretends to be. Customers are steered. Stories are polished. Certain origins are mentioned softly and others not at all. One woman's past can be turned into a lure, another's into liability. A French-sounding alias may be considered charming. A Chinese surname may invite suspicion, insult, or police attention. The same town that drinks imported wine with enthusiasm may sneer at the woman who arrived from the wrong port. And then there is religion too, threaded through class like a hidden stitch. Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, free-thinking, whatever a woman once was or was said to be, it could shape how she was read by outsiders. Respectability in the Victorian age was a whole orchestra of signals, and many women never even received the right sheet music. One rainy afternoon, Clara tells you about a black woman she knew in Denver, who ran a boarding house with immaculate sheets and took no nonsense from anyone. According to Clara, the woman made better money than half the men complaining about morality in city offices. Best business head I ever saw, she says, which is why respectable people could not bear her. Whether every detail is exact matters less than the pattern. Competence in the wrong body could provoke remarkable hostility. You begin to understand something else, too. Women in the house do not only absorb the town's prejudices, sometimes they repeat them. A cutting remark about another district, a superior tone about cheap girls, a sigh over who gets admitted to the front room and who does not. Oppression rarely enters alone. It teaches the people within it how to rank one another. That is one of its nastier efficiencies. Yet there are moments when the lines blur. Advice crosses districts. A laundress passes along a remedy. A woman lends another a brooch before a dance. Someone warns someone else which deputy to avoid. Survival can make practical allies out of people whom society insists should remain separate. Not always, not perfectly, but often enough that the official maps begin to look foolish. A customer tonight, flushed with drink and self-importance, starts speaking broadly about that kind of woman in that kind of place. He does not know he is revealing himself more than anyone else. You watch Ada's face remain smooth as china. You watch the madam lower her eyes just enough to hide her impatience. You watch another woman across the room go still for half of a beat before resuming her smile. That stillness says everything. By now you know that this profession is not one single experience. It is many layered worlds stacked uneasily together. A woman in lace in a parlour house, a woman in calico in a crib, a woman in a dance hall beside a border town plaza, a woman in a Chinese quarter under far harsher scrutiny, a woman with better clients but no savings, a woman with worse rooms but more freedom of movement. To flatten them all into one legend is to miss the structure that shaped every hour of their lives. As the lamps come up and evening settles again over the house, you adjust your cuff and glance into the mirror near the stairs. The face looking back at you has learned new expressions. Some for men, some for the madam, some for the women upstairs. And now, increasingly one for the town itself. A face that recognises how unfairly the cards are dealt and still has to sit down at the table. Outside wheels hiss through damp street mud. Inside, piano keys begin their nightly duty. Somewhere down the hall a woman laughs, tired but real. Somewhere else another woman powders over the evidence of a day spent thinking too much. And you realise with a clarity as cold as rainwater that in the Wild West even vice had a pecking order, and the promise of reinvention was never offered to everyone at the same price. The knocks at the door is never quite what it seems. Sometimes it is a customer steady and expected. Sometimes it is a stranger who has taken a wrong turn and found himself somewhere he pretends not to recognize. And sometimes more quietly it is the law arriving not with drama but with the particular weight of authority that expects to be admitted without delay. You notice the difference before you understand it. The way the madam straightens just slightly, the way Ada closes her notebook without looking down, the way conversation shifts from warm to measured in the space of a breath. The house does not panic, it adjusts. The sheriff steps in with a polite nod, hat in hand, boots leaving a faint trace of street behind him. He smells of cold air leather and something official that is difficult to name but easy to recognize. His presence carries the odd duality of the frontier. Condemnation in daylight, cooperation after dark. Law enforcement in many Western towns maintained an uneasy relationship with prostitution. Some communities outlawed it outright. Others tolerated it, regulated it, or quietly taxed it. In practice, enforcement often depended less on strict morality and more on local politics, economic interests, and the personalities involved. A brothel might be raided one month and left undisturbed the next, depending on who held influence and what the town needed to believe about itself. The sheriff exchanges a few words with the madam, their conversation low and cordial. You cannot hear everything, but the tone tells its own story. This is not a surprise visit. It is a continuation of an arrangement. A less obvious detail, though widely understood at the time, is that some brothels paid informal fees or fines to local authorities, sometimes called licenses, sometimes simply understood as the cost of doing business. These payments could offer a degree of protection or predictability, though never complete security. The law, like the frontier itself, could shift without warning. The sheriff's gaze moves through the room, not lingering, not entirely indifferent. He sees everything. The lamps, the women, the men, the careful balance of comfort and commerce. He does not comment on any of it. Instead, he accepts a drink, though he barely touches it, and speaks of minor matters. A dispute down the street, a shipment delayed, the weather turning colder sooner than expected. It is almost absurd, this polite exchange in a room built on what the same society publicly condemns. Yet no one laughs. Hypocrisy is not a joke here. It is infrastructure. Ada leans slightly toward you and murmurs, "He prefers order to virtue." It is not said unkindly, simply as fact. The sheriff finishes his drink, sets the glass down with care and nods once more to the madam before leaving. The door closes behind him and the room exhales again, though more subtly this time. You begin to see how the house exists, not outside the law, but alongside it. Negotiating, adjusting, surviving in the narrow space between prohibition and necessity. There are stories passed quietly among the women of sudden raids in other towns. Doors broken open, women arrested or fined, customers slipping out back entrances, houses shuttered overnight. Whether these stories are exaggerated or not, they carry enough truth to shape behavior. Caution becomes habit. Some researchers have noted that in certain towns, red light districts were deliberately confined to specific areas both to contain vice and to make it easier to monitor. These zones could offer a strange kind of stability, allowing businesses to operate with a degree of predictability as long as they remained within accepted boundaries. Step outside those boundaries and the protection could vanish quickly. You wonder briefly what protection truly means here. It is not safety in the way most people would understand it. It is more like a fragile agreement, one that holds as long as everyone involved continues to find it useful. The madam returns to the parlour, her expression unchanged, her posture as composed as ever. Back to work, she says, though no one had stopped. Still the words settle the room, reaffirming the rhythm. Later, as the evening deepens, a different kind of visitor arrives. A man in a well-cut coat, not a regular, not quite a stranger. He carries himself with the confidence of someone used to being obeyed, a judge perhaps, or a businessman with influence. He greets the madam with a familiarity that suggests prior acquaintance, though his tone remains carefully neutral. You watch the interaction with quiet interest. Here is another layer of the house's existence. not just tolerated but entwined with the town's leadership. The same men who shape laws, who speak in public about morality and order, who write policies and deliver judgments, also pass through these rooms, contributing to the very system they regulate. A small but telling habit you notice is how such men often prefer discretion above all else. They choose quieter corners, request fewer witnesses, speak in lower tones. Their need is not only for companionship, but for invisibility. Reputation, unlike money, is harder to replace. The tension between public virtue and private behaviour is not unique to the frontier, but it feels more exposed here, perhaps because everything else is so raw. Buildings are new, streets are unfinished, identities are still being formed. The contrast between what is said and what is done stands out more sharply. There has been ongoing discussion among historians about whether the relative openness of prostitution in some Western towns reflected a more permissive society, or simply a more pragmatic one. Some argue that the demands of frontier life encouraged a certain flexibility in moral enforcement. Others suggest that the appearance of tolerance masked deeper inequalities and contradictions. Both interpretations capture part of the truth. As the night continues, you begin to understand that the house operates within a network of relationships that extend far beyond its walls. Suppliers, laundress, doctors, lawmen, officials, neighbouring businesses. Each connection carries its own expectations, its own risks. Even the simple act of keeping the lamps lit depends on someone delivering oil. Keeping the rooms clean depends on someone willing to do the washing. Keeping the doors open depends on maintaining the right balance with those who have the power to close them. You move through the evening with this awareness settling quietly into place. Every smile, every conversation, every coin exchanged is part of a larger system, one that is not always visible but always present. At one point you find yourself near the window watching the street through the slight gap in the curtains. A group of men passes by laughing loudly, their voices carrying the careless energy of drink. They do not look in, or if they do so quickly, as if acknowledging the house too openly might reveal something about themselves. Behind you the parlour continues its careful performance. Music, laughter, movement. The illusion holds. You step back from the window and turn toward the room again, adjusting your posture, your expression, your place within the scene. The house is not separate from the town. It is part of it, woven into its fabric in ways both obvious and hidden. And as you take your place once more, you understand that survival here depends not only on what happens inside these walls, but on how well those walls are negotiated with the world beyond them. Sunday arrives with a different kind of quiet one that feels almost borrowed from another world. The house does not close, not entirely, but it softens. Voice is lower, movement slow. Even the piano, when it is open, seems to choose gentler notes, as if aware that the town outside is pretending to be better than it was the night before. You wake to the faint sound of church bells drifting across the rooftops. Not loud, not insistent, just present. They carry through the morning air with a clarity that feels almost out of place here, where most sounds are softened by walls, curtains, and human breath. For a moment, lying still, you listen without thinking. Then the meaning catches up. Church. In many Western towns, Sunday services were central to community life, even in places where lawlessness and vice were part of the daily rhythm. Churches offered not only religious guidance, but also social structure, a sense of order in environments that often felt improvised. Attendance could be high, even among those whose weekday activities might not align neatly with the sermons being delivered. Downstairs, the house stirs more slowly than usual. Coffee is brewed, but without urgency. Dresses are worn, but simpler ones. Hair is arranged, but without the elaborate care reserved for evening. The atmosphere is not exactly solemn, but it is noticeably different. Reflective, perhaps. Or just tired in a quieter way. Ada sits at the table, turning a spoon in her cup as if it might reveal something interesting at the bottom. Sunday, she says, not looking up, the town remembers its conscience. There is no bitterness in her voice, only observation. Some of the women attend church or have in the past. Not regularly, not always openly, but enough that it becomes part of the rhythm. Others avoid it entirely, preferring the house's muted calm to the scrutiny of a congregation. The decision is personal, though never entirely free of judgment, whether from others or from within. A lesser-known aspect of frontier life is that some ministers actively reached out to women in prostitution, offering charity moral instruction or attempts at reform. These efforts varied widely in tone and effectiveness. Some were compassionate, others were more rigid, focused on repentance rather than understanding. The women themselves responded in equally varied ways, accepting help, rejecting it, or navigating a careful middle ground. Clara, already dressed and adjusting the cuff of her sleeve, mentions that a preacher once tried to convince her to leave the trade and join a mission house. He said I could start fresh, she recalls with a faint smile. I asked him if fresh came with rent paid. Mabel laughed softly, and he said I had a wicked sense of humour. That sounds expensive, Ada murmurs. The conversation drifts, as it often does, between irony and sincerity. Religion here is not a simple matter of belief or disbelief. It is tangled with survival, reputation, memory. Some women carry fragments of faith with them, small rituals, quiet prayers, a sense of something larger that has not entirely abandoned them. Others have set it aside either by choice or by necessity. You find yourself thinking of the bells again, how they sounded from your room. Not accusatory, just there, a reminder of another rhythm running alongside this one. In the parlour, the curtains are drawn back slightly to let in more daylight. The room looks different again, less theatrical, more exposed. Dust motes drift in the light, visible in a way they are not at night. The furniture seems plainer, the space less enchanted. A curious detail from some accounts is that certain brothels would reduce their activity on Sundays either out of respect for local customs or simply because business tended to slow. In other places, Sunday could be as busy as any other day, particularly in towns where leisure was scarce and schedules irregular. The approach varied, shaped by local expectations and the personalities involved. By midday, a few customers arrive, though fewer than usual. Their demeanour is different. Quieter, perhaps a touch more self-aware. One man removes his hat with unusual care, as if mindful of invisible eyes. Another speaks in a lower voice than he used the night before. It is not that they have changed entirely, only that the day asks something slightly different of them. The madam moves through the room with her usual composure, though even she seems to allow a fraction more stillness into her steps. She does not mention the church bells. She does not need to. The house adjusts around them. There is an unspoken understanding here. The town may spend the morning in reflection, in prayer, in the performance of virtue. By evening it will return to its usual patterns. The house does not resent this. It accommodates it. You sit by the window for a while, watching people pass on the street. Families dressed in their best. Children trying to behave. Men walking with a straighter posture than usual. Women holding parasols or clutching hymn books. The scene has a certain gentleness, a softness that feels almost fragile, and yet beneath it you sense the same currents that run through every other day. Ambition, desire, weariness, the need for comfort, for connection, for something that makes the effort of living feel worthwhile. There has been ongoing reflection among scholars about how women in prostitution engaged with religion during this period. Some evidence suggests that faith remained an important part of their lives, offering solace or a framework for understanding their circumstances. Other accounts indicate a more distant relationship shaped by exclusion judgment or disillusionment. As with so much in this world, the reality is varied and deeply personal. In the afternoon, Clara hums a hymn under her breath while folding linens. Not loudly, not for anyone else, just enough to fill the space around her hands. The melody lingers in the room, blending with the quiet sounds of the house. It does not feel out of place. It feels like another layer. Ada notices and raises an eyebrow. Careful, she says lightly. You'll have us all converted. Clara smiles, only late or Sundays. The moment passes, but it leaves a trace behind. As the day begins to fade, the house prepares once more for evening. The curtains are drawn, the lamps are lit, dresses are chosen, hair is arranged. The transformation is gradual, familiar now. The softer light returns, and with it the expectations of the night. The bells have long since stopped. You take your place in the parlour, the room once again shaped by warmth and shadow. The piano resumes its role. Voices rise, laughter follows. The town's brief pause has ended, and the familiar rhythm continues. And as you sit there adjusting to the shift from daylight to lamplight, you understand that this life does not exist in opposition to the world outside. It exists alongside it, intertwined with its contradictions, its rituals, its moments of reflection, and its return to habit. Sunday does not change the house. It simply reminds you that even here, among all the noise and negotiation, there are quieter currents moving beneath the surface, shaping how people see themselves, if only for a few hours at a time. By the time Sunday loosens its grip and ordinary vice settles back into the floorboards, you have learned something useful about the house. It cannot survive on tension alone. Nobody can. Not the women, not the customers, not even the madam with her ledger face and velvet composure. If the place were only bargaining, waiting and guarded conversation, it would turn sour in a week. So tucked around the edges of the work, sometimes inside it and sometimes stubbornly apart from it, are little pockets of pleasure. Music, cards, dancing, sweets, jokes too silly to survive daylight. Tiny acts of escape, practical as soap and nearly as necessary. This evening begins with the piano being tuned, or at least coaxed toward decency by the same man who plays it badly after midnight. He arrives carrying a little case smelling faintly of tobacco wool and winter air. He leans over the instrument with all the seriousness of a surgeon, tapping, tightening, listening, muttering under his breath when a note misbehaves. The women watch him with mild skepticism. They have heard this piano after midnight. They know what the word tuned means in theory. Still, when he is done, the first run of notes comes out brighter, rounder, less wounded. The room notices at once. Clara actually stops in the doorway and says, "Well, we may yet be civilized." Music mattered in many Western brothels, dance halls and saloons, not just as decoration, but as part of the business itself. Pianos, fiddles, guitars, singers, and occasional small ensembles helped create atmosphere, encourage customers to linger, and gave houses a reputation that could distinguish them from rougher competitors. A good parlour with music could charge for refinement as much as for anything else. Tonight the mood is light from the start. A cattle buyer, flush with recent success, insists on buying drinks for half the room. The madam permits this because she is no fool, and because celebration, if managed carefully, can be profitable. A pair of travelling salesmen end up at the card table with Ada, who takes one look at their cheerful confidence and smiles in a way that suggests their money is already halfway out the door. Near the fire, Mabel persuades the piano man to play something danceable, and before long one of the women is turning in a small circle across the carpet with her skirts lifting just enough to show neat boots and impossible grace. It is not a formal dance, nothing so polished. More a house releasing pressure through movement. The men clap along. One tries to join in and is gently discouraged before he tramples a side table. Laughter spreads and loose, not the measured variety used to flatter egos. For a few minutes the room belongs less to transaction and more to play. A charming little frontier habit noted in scattered recollections is that some women kept private stashes of lemon drops, sugared almonds, or candied ginger in drawers or reticules, doling them out at strategic moments like benevolent smugglers of sweetness. One imagines all the dust whiskey, cigar smoke and masculine bluster of the West being briefly interrupted by a woman pressing a lemon drop into her own palm and deciding life might continue after all. There is something wonderfully defiant about it. Ada, true to form, has peppermints hidden in the pocket of her skirt and shares them only with those she deems worthy, which appears to be a category based partly on affection and partly on whether a person has annoyed her within the last hour. You receive one without comment. This feels like advancement. The candy cools your mouth while the room warms around you. The tuned piano has improved everyone's spirits, though not enough to rescue the piano man from his own tempo once he begins playing in earnest. Still he tries. A tune from back east slips into a lively reel, then into a sentimental ballad that makes one of the salesmen stare too hard into his glass. Music has that effect in places like this. It reaches beneath the costume people wear for the evening and gives a little tug. There is a long-running question among historians about how much leisure women in brothels truly enjoyed on their own terms and how much entertainment remained tied to business demands. In many cases, the line is impossible to draw cleanly. A card game with customers may be profitable but also genuinely amusing. A song may be meant to attract trade yet still comfort the women singing it. Pleasure, like so much else in the house, tends to arrive mixed. The card table proves the point beautifully. Ada takes the 2 travelling salesmen and a local clerk through 3 rounds of a game that begins as social amusement and ends as quiet redistribution of funds. She is not cruel about it. She is much too elegant for that. She simply lets the men underestimate her until their expressions begin to sag. "Oh dear," she says after winning a neat little pile of chips and notes. "I do hope this does not damage interstate commerce." Even the Madam says, "You find yourself laughing more tonight than you have in days. Not because the work has become easy. It has not. Not because the house has softened into innocence. Certainly has not. But because human beings rather stubbornly insist on snatching delight from difficult places. A joke in the hallway, a song half remembered, a clumsy dance step, a peppermint. These things matter, perhaps especially here. The women also carry their own little superstitions which drift through the house like harmless ghosts. Clara knocks 3 times on the banister before a busy evening. Mabel refuses to wear opals, convinced they bring tears. Ada claims it is bad luck to light a new lamp from the end of a dying candle, though she cannot explain why and does not care to try. Another woman turns a coin in her palm before choosing whether to sit near the piano or the fire. None of this stops with education or experience. Frontier life is too uncertain for that. People collect rituals the way others collect china. One curious belief found in some corners of the 19th century held that carrying a rabbit's foot, a silver charm, or even a particular ribbon could guard against bad customers or bad nights. The charms may have done nothing measurable, but they did something emotional, which is rarely nothing. A ritual can steady the hands. A steady hand can change the course of an evening. The house itself seems to enjoy these lighter hours. The air smells of coal warmth, coffee kept too long near the stove orange peel. Someone has twisted over a glass, and the faint powdery sweetness of face powder rising whenever a woman laughs close enough to disturb it. The curtains hold back the street. The lamp flames move softly in their chimneys. Even the furniture, worn and dignified and a little overused, seems to settle with approval when the room is happy. A customer asks if you sing. You tell him only when bribed with quality candy. He looks uncertain whether this is a joke. That gives you a few blissful seconds of private amusement before you take pity and smile. He relaxes at once. Men in this room often need permission to enjoy themselves without embarrassment. The house specialises in issuing it. Someone begins a round of mildly scandalous toasts, most of them too silly to remember by morning. Clara proposes one to good boots and bad decisions, without which the West would collapse entirely. Ada lifts her glass to clean linen, sharper wits, and men who underestimate women for the educational value. The clerk contributes something earnest about beauty and destiny, and the room kindly ignores. By now you can feel how laughter rearranges the body. Shoulders drop, jaw unclenches. Even the corset seems less oppressive when the room is bright with foolishness. Not comfortable exactly. Let us not overpraise Victorian engineering, but less like punishment. As the night deepens, the fun narrows and softens. The card game dissolves into smaller conversations, the dance ends. The piano drifts toward quieter tunes. Yet the change in atmosphere remains. Men lean back more easily. Women glance at one another with that hidden thread of understanding you now recognize. Something has been restored, or at least briefly mended. You think watching Clara tilt her head back in laughter, and Ada rake in another modest victory at cards that people later would tell these stories all wrong if they told them at all. They would lean too hard on drama and neglect the peppermint, the lamp superstition, the tune that everyone half remembers, the ridiculous toast that makes a tired room feel alive again. Yet those details may be closer to the truth than grand legend ever was. Because this life is not sustained only by toughness, it is sustained by relief, by brightness in small doses, by music that is almost in tune, by a hidden sweet in a pocket, by the comic miracle of finding something worth laughing at in a town that smells of mud half the year. And as the parlour settles into its warmer, gentler rhythm with cards sliding over Bay's piano notes, brushing the edges of conversation and the lamp glow turning every face a little kinder than daylight does, you understand that escape in the Wild West was rarely a train ticket or a new surname alone. Sometimes it was simply one decent song, one silly joke, one peppermint on the tongue enough to make the night feel briefly less heavy before the work resumed. The house has its laughter, its music, its moments of brightness, but none of that removes the quiet calculations that run beneath everything. By now, you have learned to notice the signals that pass between the women without words. A glance toward the door, a hand resting a little too firmly on a table edge, a pause in conversation that does not quite match the rhythm of the room. These are the small warnings, the early signs that something may not go as smoothly as it should. Danger here is rarely theatrical. It does not arrive with a thunderclap or a villain announcing himself in bold tones. It comes in subtler forms. A man who drinks too quickly, a voice that grows louder rather than softer as the evening goes on, a grip that lingers too long, a story that does not quite add up. You begin to understand that survival depends less on bravery than on attention. Women in this line of work developed a wide range of strategies to manage risk. They learned to read body language, to steer conversations away from volatility, to recognize when a situation might turn. Houses often had informal systems in place. Signals, agreed upon phrases, the positioning of furniture, even the way a door was left slightly ajar. None of it guaranteed safety, but it created layers of awareness. Ada once told you that the most important skill is knowing when to end an interaction before it begins to sour. You do not wait for trouble to introduce itself properly, she said. You excuse yourself early. Tonight you see that principle in action. A man enters, his boots heavy on the floor, his expression already set in a way that suggests impatience. The madam greets him with her usual composure, but there is a slight shift in her tone, almost imperceptible. She directs him toward a chair near the door, not deeper into the room, a subtle boundary. The women take note. They adjust their positions, their conversations, their attention. No one makes a show of it. The room continues its performance, but the undercurrent has changed. A small but telling practice in some establishments was the use of bells or coded knocks to signal distress. A ring at the right moment could bring assistance quickly without alarming the entire house. These systems were simple but effective enough to provide a measure of reassurance in an unpredictable environment. You move through the evening with a heightened awareness, noticing how often the women check in with one another through brief glances or passing touches, a hand on a shoulder, a nod from across the room. These gestures are not dramatic, but they form a quiet network of support. The man near the door grows restless. He speaks louder, laughs too sharply, gestures with a little too much force. The madam steps in again, her presence calm but firm. She redirects him, offers another drink, shifts the conversation. It is a careful balancing act, one that requires both tact and authority. In many frontier towns, the absence of strong formal protections meant that women often relied on each other and on the management of the house to maintain a degree of safety. This could include setting clear expectations for behaviour, refusing service to certain individuals, or intervening when the situations escalated. The effectiveness of these measures varied, but they were an essential part of daily life. You notice how the room itself plays a role. The arrangement of furniture allows for movement, for visibility. There are few places where someone can be entirely out of sight. The lighting, while soft, is sufficient to keep faces visible. Even the placement of the piano creates a natural barrier, a way to separate spaces without making it obvious. A curious habit among some women was to carry small personal items that could be used defensively if needed. Hairpins, for example, could serve more than one purpose, not as weapons in the dramatic sense, but as tools of last resort, symbols of preparedness in a world where control was never complete. The tension in the room eases as the man near the door eventually leaves his departure marked by a slight shift in the collective posture of the house. Shoulders relax, conversations resume their earlier rhythm. The piano picks up a lighter tune as if to smooth over the moment. You realise that this pattern repeats itself often though, not always so noticeably. Small adjustments, quiet interventions, a constant awareness of the balance between hospitality and caution. It is not a perfect system, but it is a practiced one. There is an ongoing conversation among those who study this period about how much danger women in prostitution faced on a daily basis. Some accounts emphasize the risks, the potential for violence, the lack of protection. Others suggest that many women navigated these environments with a degree of skill and resilience that allowed them to manage those risks more effectively than commonly assumed. The truth, as usual, lies somewhere in between, shaped by individual circumstances and the specific conditions of each town. As the night continues, you find yourself more attuned to these subtle dynamics. You notice how quickly a smile can shift to a firmer expression, how a light touch can become a guiding hand, how a casual remark can redirect a conversation. These are the tools of the trade, as essential as any dress or piece of jewellery. At one point, Mabel catches your eye and gives a small nod, a silent acknowledgement that you're beginning to understand. It is not praise exactly, but it carries a sense of recognition. The house, for all its softness and warmth, is built on vigilance. Every laugh, every gesture, every movement is part of a larger awareness. It is not exhausting in the way one might expect, though it does require constant attention. More like a steady hum in the background, a reminder that the world outside these walls is never entirely kept at bay. You think of the earlier moments of music and laughter, of the peppermint in your mouth, of the brief lightness that filled the room. Those moments are real, but they exist alongside this quieter, more serious layer. One does not replace the other. They coexist, shaping the experience in ways that are difficult to separate. As the evening draws on, the house settles back into its familiar rhythm. The lamps glow steadily. The piano continues its patient work. The women move through the room with practiced ease, their awareness woven into every action. And you now, part of that pattern, find yourself moving with it, reading the room, adjusting your place within it. The lessons of the night are not always spoken, but they are learned nonetheless. In this world, survival is not about avoiding danger entirely. It's about recognizing it, responding to it, and continuing forward with as much grace as the situation allows. It is about understanding that beneath the surface of warmth and charm lies a constant negotiation, one that requires both strength and subtlety. And as you sit there, the soft glow of the lamps reflecting in the polished wood around you, you realize that this quiet vigilance is as much a part of the house as any curtain or piece of furniture. It is the unseen structure that supports everything else, the steady awareness that allows the night to unfold without unraveling completely. At some point, without anyone announcing it, you begin to notice time in the house, the way one notices dust in a shaft of sunlight. Not all at once, not with cruelty, just gradually, as if the mirror has learned a new skill and is now slightly too good at its work. It begins in small places. A woman who used to sit nearest the brightest lamp now chooses the chair beside the fire where shadows are kinder. Another powders a little more carefully at the temples. Another laughs off a comment about being seasoned with such elegance that the sting hides inside the joke like a pin in a cushion. Dresses are altered. Colours change. Hairstyles soften or grow more elaborate, depending on what the year seems to demand of a face. The house is full of adjustments, but these feel different. Not about style alone, about duration. You are still new enough to be watched with a kind of curiosity, still uncertain enough to be coached, still fresh enough that customers ask questions in tones meant to flatter themselves for noticing you. Yet even you can see how quickly the trade measures a woman's value against youth novelty and the increasingly fragile machinery of appearance. A few years in this world can land on a face differently than a decade elsewhere. Long nights, stress poor air, too little rest, and the endless work of looking untroubled all leave their mark. One hard truth of the 19th century sex trade is that age often shaped a woman's earning power sharply, especially in houses that sold illusion as carefully as they sold privacy. Youth was prized, or at least the appearance of it, and many women found themselves adapting their roles as they grew older. Some shifted to different kinds of houses, some relied more on regular clients, some moved into management boarding arrangements or other work connected to the trade. Very few could ignore the mirror forever. Ada is the first to speak plainly about it, which is not surprising, because Ada speaks plainly about nearly everything once the room is empty enough. She is adjusting the cuff of a rose-coloured dress at the kitchen table, her spectacles perched low on her nose for the sewing and nowhere to be seen once evening begins. "You know what the men mean when they call a woman elegant," she says. You glance up from your coffee. That she is elegant. Ada gives you a look of great patience for your innocence. Sometimes, more often, they mean she's no longer young enough for adjectives like pretty to arrive on their own. Clara, buttering bread at the stove, snorts into her plate. It's the kind of line that makes everyone laugh and then go quiet half a beat later, because it's too accurate not to. A revealing little custom from the period is that some women reportedly save their best dresses far past their prime, not because the garment still fit fashion, but because the dress had once worked. A bodice that earned well in one town might travel to another, altered at the sleeves, fresh ribbon, added the skirt re-hemmed, as if success itself could be unpicked and sewn back in. There is something almost moving in that, a faith in cloth, a hope that charm might still be stored in the seams. The women you know do not surrender easily to time. They bargain with it. They use better lighting, softer colours, powder applied with new cunning, sleeves that flatter the arm, a collar that lengthens the neck, hair arranged to draw the eye upward. Frontiers are full of improvisation and female survival. Here may be the finest improvisation of all. Still, there are moments when the tension slips through. One afternoon, Mabel finds a silver strand at her temple and stares at it with such betrayal you would think her own body had embezzled funds. Clara tells her to pluck it. Ada says no, let it live, it has earned the right. Mabel plucks it anyway and declares the matter closed. 10 minutes later, she is calmer. 20 minutes later, she is convinced there are 3 more. You begin to understand that age in the house is not simply biological, it is social. A woman may be young in years and already tired in manner. Another may be older but bright with wit, style and hard-won command. Customers have their preferences, of course, but houses do too. A seasoned woman can manage a room spot trouble sooner, calm a shy man, handle a fool and save the house expense in broken glass and unnecessary drama. The market may worship youth, but experience keeps the lamps lit. Some historians emphasize how fleeting a profitable career in prostitution could be, especially in frontier settings where illness, injury, addiction or local upheaval shortened working lives. Others point out that the picture was more varied and that many women remained in the trade for years by adapting roles, cultivating client loyalty, or moving into related positions. Both patterns appear in the record. The common thread is not ease, it is adjustment. Adjustment shows up everywhere once you know to look. Clara, who might once have been all bright ribbons and teasing glances, now prefers deeper jewel tones and a slower style of conversation that makes men feel distinguished in her company. Ada uses humour the way other women use perfume. The red-haired woman downstairs, who is perhaps not read without help these days, knows exactly which customers want flirtation and which want order disguised as affection. Each woman builds a method around what remains strong. There is a certain frontier cruelty in the way towns gossip about women aging in the trade, as though the men passing through remain eternally 27 and morally weightless. Newspapers can be especially nasty, using language that turns women into worn goods, while treating male appetite as whether regrettable, perhaps, but natural. Victorian morality had a particular talent for aging women harshly and aging men not at all. One evening, a customer, too young to know how stupid he sounds, refers to Clara as one of the old hands. He means no great harm, probably. He means familiarity, ease, perhaps even admiration. But the room goes a little still. Clara smiles at him so sweetly, it ought to be bottled and sold as poison. "Darling," she says, "if experience troubles you, I can always send you to someone who still thinks your stories are original." Ada nearly chokes on her drink. The young man reddens. Clara glides on as if nothing happened. That is another way women survive time. They learn to turn humiliation into theatre before it can settle properly on the skin. Yet private fear remains. You see it in the little economies of the dressing table. A jar nearly empty, scraped for one more night. A ribbon chosen because it flatters. An old cameo brought out because it suggests maturity rather than age. A neckline raised just slightly after one birthday, lowered after another, if fashion changes its mind. So much of this work involves being read, and women become scholars of their own faces. There is also exhaustion, which can age a person faster than years. Nights accumulate, so do disappointments. A woman may not fear wrinkles half so much as she fears becoming too tired to care how she looks. Indifference is more dangerous here than fine lines. Indifference lets the house see you slipping. Writers still differ on whether Western brothels offered any meaningful path for older women to retain status, or whether most were simply pushed downward through the trade's hierarchy as youth faded. The answer seems to have depended heavily on local conditions, the woman's skills, and whether she could gather enough money allies or influence before time narrowed the field. A woman with wit, management sense, and loyal regulars might command real authority. A woman without those buffers could fall frighteningly fast. One night, while pinning up your hair, you catch your reflection beside Ada's in the mirror. Your skin is smoother, her gaze is steadier, your shoulders carry uncertainty, hers carry calculation. The comparison unsettles you not because one face is lovelier than the other, but because you suddenly see the trade as a corridor and not a single room. You are at one end of it. She is farther down, Clara farther still, perhaps though she crosses the space with such grace the distance almost disappears. The thought follows you downstairs. In the parlour the lamps are kind as ever, kind but not blind. Music drifts from the piano, the curtains glow softly from the firelight. Men arrive carrying dust money, loneliness, vanity, and all the other materials from which the evening is made. One of them glances first at you, then at Ada, then back again. Not cruelly, simply comparing, as customers always do. And in that glance you feel the future move just a little like a floorboard settling under weight. It is not a melodramatic revelation. No thunder, no tragic violin from the piano, only the quiet knowledge that this life does not keep anyone at the centre forever. Fashion shifts. Towns change. Faces alter. A woman learns to turn wit into value, poise, into protection, experience, into a different kind of allure, or she is left at the mercy of novelty and men's short memories. So when Clara adjusts your collar on her way past and says, "Keep some part of yourself for later," you hear more than advice about the evening. You hear strategy. Save money. Save strength. Save something no customer can appraise. Because beauty here is a season, and the house is full of women who learn too late that seasons do not negotiate. And as the room fills again with smoke, laughter, perfume, and piano notes trying to sound younger than they are, you sit very straight in your chair and understand that in this trade the mirror is never merely glass. It is calendar warning rival and tutor teaching every woman in the room that time will have its share whether or not the ledger mentions it. Once you start seeing the future as something that can narrow every coin begins to look different in your hand. Not richer, sadly. The frontier remains far too inventive in separating women from their money for that. But different. A coin is no longer only tonight's supper, tomorrow's soap, next week's ribbon, or the laundress's patient little ambush. It is also possibility. A train ticket, a rented room, a stove that belongs to you, a shop sign, a second name in a second town, a version of yourself that does not have to sit beneath the parlour lamp and look interesting on command. This is how leaving begins. Not with a dramatic escape in the rain, not with a noble speech, not with a handsome widower, mysteriously free of defects. It begins in the head, then in the hem, then in the ledger if luck is unusually charitable. One little sum set aside, then another. One quiet refusal to spend. One dress repaired instead of replaced. One gift accepted because it can be pawned. One drink declined because you would rather keep the price of it than the feeling. Exit, where it exists at all, is usually stitched together from small, stubborn acts. Some women in the 19th century did leave prostitution and move into other kinds of work, though the path was rarely simple. Marriage offered one route, but not always a good one. Boarding houses, restaurants, laundries, saloons, dressmaking shops, and rooming houses could all become second acts. Others moved to new towns and began again under altered names. A few used their earnings to buy property or invest in small businesses. The idea of total reinvention was possible enough to tempt, but uncertain enough to keep many women where they were. Ada claims that any plan worth having should fit inside your mind before it fits inside your purse. She says this while sorting through a little packet of notes and coins in her room, her door shut, her candle low. She has finally decided you may be shown the serious hiding places. The first is not very romantic, a slit sewn neatly into the lining of an old winter cloak. The second is better, a false bottom in a hat box. The third is almost insulting in its simplicity. Folded bills inside a packet labelled licorice powder, because as Ada says, no man in this house has ever once looked closely at a medicinal packet unless he planned to avoid taking it. You laugh, but then you remember the doctor's paper powders and realise that she is absolutely right. A small, almost perfect frontier detail is that women sometimes hid savings in hair rolls, mattress ticks, stovepipes, corset bindings, hollowed books, and even inside old glove fingers tucked deep into trunks. When banking is unreliable, privacy is scarce, and theft is common, ingenuity becomes a savings institution. One imagines future historians opening a corset and discovering fiscal policy. The house itself is full of women at different distances from departure. Clara claims she is leaving every spring and somehow remains every autumn. Mabel says she will one day open a millinery shop where no man may enter unless invited, and all ribbons are paid for in cash. The red-haired woman downstairs, who has become less talkative these last weeks, speaks not of shops but of land. A place with chickens, she says once unexpectedly, and no piano. That part she says with such feeling that everyone falls briefly silent. The dreams vary because the women vary. Some want domestic quiet, some want independence, some want respectability or at least the appearance of it. Some want only distance from this exact street. A better boarding house in another town would do. A room with a different view, a future in which they are not known too well by the sheriff, the butcher, and every man who ever sat under this lamp. Escape need not be grand to feel urgent. There is a long-standing disagreement among historians about how often women in Western prostitution truly manage to leave and establish stable second lives. Certain biographies suggest remarkable upward movement, especially for those who acquired property, married strategically, or moved into business. Other evidence points to recurrence vulnerability and the difficulty of outrunning stigma once money ran thin or illness struck. Both patterns seem real. The West produced reinvention, yes, but it also produced a great many unfinished plans. Marriage, of course, floats through these conversations like a promise printed on poor quality paper. Everybody mentions it. Nobody entirely trusts it. Occasionally a woman does marry a customer or a local businessman and leaves the house for a better life, though. Better can mean many things, and not all of them cheerful. A husband might offer security or merely a different kind of dependence. He might rescue a woman from the trade or simply transfer the terms of her confinement. The fairy tale version exists mostly for people who do not have to test it. One evening, a drummer from St. Louis tells you with far too much confidence that a pretty woman like you will have no trouble finding a husband if you want one. It is said as a compliment and lands like a cheap coin. You smile because that is easier than explaining to him that men are often fond of fantasies right up until they are asked to live beside them. He means well, perhaps, The world is still worse for that kind of good intention. The madam, who hears more than anyone suspects later, says only this: "Never retire into a man's promises, retire into your own provisions." For once even Ada does not improve upon the line. You start keeping a little sum aside, not much, not enough to tempt you into boasting, which is wise because the frontier punishes premature optimism with almost artistic enthusiasm. Still, the act changes you. You mend more carefully, spend less impulsively. Watch the customers with a new question at the back of your mind. Not what can he give me tonight, but what part of tonight might help me leave. That question alters the room. A customer with a dry goods store becomes a possible source of discounted fabric. A widowed landlady looking for quiet tenants becomes interesting. The woman at church who runs a boarding house becomes worth observing from a distance. Even newspapers acquire new importance. You begin scanning advertisements and notices the way a trapped bird studies windows. Rooms to let. Businesses for sale. Train departures. Employment for cooks, seamstresses, caretakers. Half of it useless, some of it insulting, a little of it tantalizing. One rarely discussed but very real part of leaving was paperwork or the lack of it. Names had been changed, ages blurred, marriages invented, erased or complicated. References might be impossible. Respectable employers preferred not to ask too many questions only if they were desperate, and desperation was itself unpredictable. Starting over required not just money, but a plausible story, and many women had already spent years telling different ones to different people. So the past becomes another thing to budget for. Mabel says if she ever opens her hat shop, she will claim to be a widow from Cincinnati and dare anyone to prove otherwise. Clara says she shall be a genteel music teacher, which makes Ada laugh so hard she nearly spills her coffee. A music teacher, Ada says. You would seduce the metronome. Clara throws a biscuit at her and misses. Yet beneath the joke sits a serious truth. Reinvention after prostitution often required narrative skill. A woman needed a history the next town would accept. Widowhood was useful, Eastern origins helped. References from dead people were especially convenient. Morality could be repaired on paper faster than in gossip, which is why distance mattered so much. By now you know enough not to romanticize the road out. A woman who leaves may still be followed by debt memory disease, bad luck or loneliness. She may miss the companionship of the house even while despising the work. She may find that ordinary respectability is drearier and colder than she imagined. She may fail, she may return. The frontier is full of circles disguised as journeys, but some do go. You hear of a woman who kept books for a saloon owner, then bought into the business, then sold her share and moved east. Another who married a blacksmith and ran the household accounts with such precision that everyone feared her more than him. Another who vanished between one season and the next, leaving only an unpaid seamstress and a rumour of San Francisco. The stories pass around the house in pieces half legend and half instruction. They matter whether fully true or not. A possibility need not be perfect to be nourishing. As evening settles and the parlour begins assembling itself once again into softness and suggestion, you find yourself touching the little seam in your skirt where two folded notes now rest. The gesture is quick, private, almost prayerful. Downstairs the piano has started. A customer laughs by the fire. The madam opens her ledger. Perfume lifts from the dressing rooms and trails down the hall. Everything is as it was. Everything slightly altered. Because now the house is no longer only where you work. It is also perhaps the place from which you may someday depart. And that thought changes the taste of the air. Not sweeter exactly. The room still smells of coal lamp oil, tobacco powder and ambition. But behind it all there is another scent now. One the others would understand at once if you named it. Not freedom, which is too large and theatrical a word for a place like this. Something smaller, more realistic. A key not yet cut. A train not yet boarded. A shop not yet rented. A future still folded tightly enough to hide in a hem. And as you sit under the amber light with your posture perfect and your expression pleasantly unreadable, You realise that leaving the Wild West was often less a leap than a long act of quiet preparation performed in secret, while the music played and the town assumed you would always be exactly where it left you. By now you have learned that the house does not end at its walls. It continues outward into stories, into gossip, into the strange afterlife of memory that turns real women into something flatter, brighter, and far less complicated than they ever were. You begin to notice this most clearly in the newspapers. The local paper arrives folded and smelling faintly of ink and dust, its columns filled with reports of cattle prices, railway, progress, political arguments, and the occasional scandal dressed up as moral concern. Sometimes the house is mentioned directly, sometimes only hinted at, wrapped in phrases like certain establishments or undesirable influences. The tone shifts depending on the day, the editor, and what the town needs to believe about itself. One week the paper condemns vice with solemn language calling for reform and order. The next it advertises a new theatre performance with dancers whose costumes are described in suspiciously admiring detail. The contradiction is almost elegant in its consistency. Printed accounts from the period often exaggerated or simplified the lives of women in prostitution, turning them into symbols rather than individuals. Some were portrayed as tragic figures, others as dangerous temptresses, still others as curiosities. Rarely were they shown as complex people navigating difficult circumstances with a mix of practicality, humour and resilience. Ada reads aloud one such article with exaggerated seriousness, her voice taking on the pompous rhythm of the writer. A lamentable decline in public morals, she intones, pausing just long enough to sip her coffee, which I assume means business has been excellent. Clara laughs. If morality declines any further, we shall need a second piano. The room responds with quiet amusement. They have seen this performance before. The town speaks about them as if they are both central to its identity and somehow outside it, necessary and shameful, visible and invisible. A curious detail from the era is how photographers sometimes captured images of women in brothels or dance halls, staging them in poses meant to suggest elegance or allure. These photographs, often circulated later, contributed to the mythology of the soiled dove, a term that sounds poetic until you remember it was used to reduce real lives into a single convenient image. You think of the mirror upstairs, how it reflects not just your face, but the version of yourself shaped for the room. Now imagine that reflection fixed in time, printed, passed around, interpreted by people who never heard your voice or saw you sit barefoot in the kitchen laughing over coffee. The thought is unsettling. Stories travel faster than truth here. A woman who leaves the house might be remembered as a great beauty, a tragic figure, a cunning operator, or not remembered at all depending on who tells the tale. Details shift. Names change. Entire lives are compressed into a few sentences that fit neatly into someone else's narrative. There has been much discussion among historians about how the legend of the Wild West, particularly its portrayal of women in prostitution, was shaped by later writers, filmmakers, and storytellers. Many of these depictions emphasize drama, romance, or moral lessons, often at the expense of accuracy. The result is a cultural memory that is vivid but incomplete, rich in imagery, but thin in detail. You begin to see how easily the house could become a story rather than a place. The piano becomes a symbol, the curtains a backdrop, the women characters rather than people. It is a transformation that happens quietly over time as memories are retold and simplified. Clara once knew a woman who was written about in a travelling pamphlet described as the most enchanting lady west of the Mississippi. According to Clara, the woman in question had a sharp temper, a fondness for gambling, and a habit of swearing under her breath when annoyed. None of this made it into the pamphlet. Enchantment, it seems, does not allow for irritation. You find yourself wondering what version of you might survive in such a story. The name you use here, polished and practiced, might be all that remains. The real one, the one you arrived with, might disappear entirely, folded away like an old dress no longer in fashion. The house continues its work, indifferent to its future reputation. The madame balances her ledger. Ada counts her coins. Mabel repairs a seam. Clara adjusts a ribbon. These actions are immediate, practical, grounded in the present. The idea of becoming a legend flattering or otherwise holds little value when there are dresses to mend and customers to manage. Yet the awareness lingers. Outside the town grows and changes. New buildings rise, old ones are replaced, streets are renamed, people come and go. The house may stand for years, or it may be gone within a season, its memory absorbed into the shifting landscape. In some towns, former red light districts have left faint traces in maps or local lore, their histories preserved in fragments. In others, they have vanished almost completely, their stories scattered or forgotten. The physical spaces may disappear, but the narratives continue reshaped by each generation that tells them. You sit by the window one evening watching the street as the light fades. A group of travellers passes their conversation lively, their attention caught by the glow of the house. They pause just for a moment as if considering stepping inside. Then they move on, their laughter trailing behind them. You wonder what they imagine this place to be, what stories they carry with them, what version of the house exists in their minds. Behind you the parlour hums with its usual rhythm. Music, conversation, the soft clink of glasses. The reality of the house is here in these small continuous moments, not in the grand narratives or the simplified images, but in the daily work of living. And yet you cannot entirely dismiss the power of those stories. They shape how others see you, how the town understands itself, how history will remember or forget. As the evening deepens, you return to your place in the room, aware now of the layers that surround you. The immediate present with its demands and routines, the personal past with its hidden corners and chosen names, and the uncertain future where this life may be retold in ways you cannot control. You adjust your posture, your expression, your role within the scene. The house continues as it always does, balancing reality and performance with quiet precision. And as you move through the familiar motions of the night, you understand that what it was actually like to live this life may never be fully captured in any single story. It exists in the details, the contradictions, the moments that do not fit neatly into legend, the laughter that fades too quickly, the coin hidden in a hem, the shared glance between women who understand without speaking, the scent of perfume lingering in a room long after the lamps are out. These are the things that remain even when the rest is reshaped into something easier to tell. At the end of it all, when the lamps burn low, and the house begins giving up its borrowed glow to the first grey hint of morning, what stays with you is not the scandal people prefer. It is the cost. Not the price on the ledger, though, that matters. Not the room, fee, the laundry charge, the doctor's visit, the bottle of scent, the hem stitched around hidden notes. Those costs are easy enough to list. They can be counted. They can be argued over. They can be paid, postponed, hidden, or cursed. The deeper cost is harder to hold still. It lives in the body, yes, but also in the nerves, the memory, the constant work of splitting yourself into usable pieces and hoping you can gather them again before sleep. By now you know the house almost by heartbeat, the piano's first uncertain notes at dusk, the warm breath of the parlour once the lamps are lit, the hallway hush after a door closes upstairs, the kitchen at noon with coffee and thread and women mending what can be mended. You know where the floorboards complain, where the draft slips under the back door in winter, where the mirror is kindest and where it tells the truth too plainly. You know the scent of rosewater trying to defeat coal smoke. You know the sound of laughter that means delight and the sound that means business is being managed. And because you know it so well, you understand now what this life has asked in return. The emotional burden of prostitution in the Wild West was not a single dramatic tragedy repeated night after night. More often it was cumulative, a slow wearing down, the strain of staying watchful, the effort of making strangers feel chosen while keeping part of yourself locked away, the fatigue of listening, pleasing, soothing and negotiating without ever being allowed the full luxury of collapse. It was labour done through expression, posture, touch, silence and memory. It required charm, caution, and the sort of endurance that leaves very little space for innocence. You sit in the parlour after the last customer is gone. The fire has settled to a deep red glow. The lamps are still lit, but only just. Their light is soft now, almost watery. The room looks older at this hour, more truthful. The chairs are no longer arranged for effect. The piano is shut. A glass stands forgotten on the mantel. Somewhere upstairs a basin is set down with a faint hollow sound. The canary miracle of miracles is silent. Ada is asleep in a chair with her head tipped back inelegantly enough to prove she is not performing for anyone. Clara's gone upstairs, one hand pressed to her lower back, too tired even for wit. Mabel sits on the hearthrug with her stockings off, rubbing one foot and staring into the coals as if they might answer a question she has not yet formed. The madam is at her desk, not writing, just resting her hands on the closed ledger. Even she looks smaller when the house is empty. This is the part no myth ever lingers on long enough. The aftermath, the women as bodies again, as minds, as souls if you wish to use that word. Not temptress, dear, not cautionary figures, not frontier ornaments shimmering beneath a red lamp. Just tired human beings in a room that still smells of lamp oil, stale perfumed tobacco, soot, face powder, and the faint sweetness of the apples nobody quite finishes. A small but memorable detail from old recollections is that some women, after the last guest had left, would loosen their hair and sit together in silence for a few minutes before saying anything at all. Not because they were unhappy in some grand theatrical way, and not because there was always some secret sorrow to confess. Simply because the body needed a moment to return, the face needed to unclench, the self needed to come back down the stairs. That detail feels truer than most legends. You think back over everything the house has taught you. The new name, the better posture, the way furniture signals rank, the hidden economies of beauty, the ledger's quiet appetite, the doctor's bag, the Sundays of public virtue and private contradiction, the little communities built over coffee and sewing, the caution tucked inside kindness, the future folded into a hem, none of it glamorous, not really, yet not empty either. Life almost never is. Even in hard places, people remain funny, vain, generous, petty, brave, frightened, tender, calculating and absurd all at once. There is continuing debate among historians about whether the lives of women in Western prostitution should be understood primarily through the lens of exploitation, entrepreneurship, survival, gendered, labour, or social performance. The trouble with the question is that many lives contained all of those things at once. A woman could exercise a strategy and still be constrained. She could earn well and still be trapped. She could create a measure of independence and still pay for it dearly in health, reputation, and peace of mind. Any single label flattens her, and flattening is exactly what later legend has always liked to do. But if you stay here long enough, if you really sit in this chair and breathe this thick half-spent air and listen to the house settling, after midnight you begin to understand the truth in a quieter way. To be a so-called lady of the night in the Wild West was to live at the meeting point of many hungers. The town's hunger for comfort, men's hunger for attention, softness, novelty, reassurance, the economy's hunger for cash, respectability's hunger for someone else to carry the blame, and beneath all of that your own hunger, which may have begun it all. Hunger for money, safety, escape, a roof, a second chance, a life broad enough to stand upright in. That is the thing people forget when they turn women like you into photographs, anecdotes, or songs. Hunger is rarely picturesque. The madam finally rises and begins extinguishing lamps one by one. Each darkened flame takes a little of the room with it. The wallpaper dulls. The gilt mirror loses interest in everyone. The corners deepen. Ada wakes enough to mutter something dry and stumble toward the stairs. Mabel stands slowly wincing, then laughs at herself for wincing. You remain where you are a moment longer, your hands folded in your lap, feeling the day's last warmth in the hearth. You think of the women who left, the women who stayed, the women who vanished between towns, between names, between records. The women remembered only as someone beautiful in a newspaper paragraph or a face in a faded photograph. The women who bought land, the women who buried savings in hems, the women who taught one another how to curl hair, avoid drunks, hide money, and survive long enough to imagine another life. There were many Wests, and this was one of them. Not the loudest, perhaps, not the noblest, according to those who wrote speeches and sermons, but real, furnished with real curtains, real ledgers, real hunger, real laughter, real fatigue. A world built inside the rougher world outside, where women made order out of risk and softness, out of necessity, even when the softness had to be rented by the hour. At last you stand. The chair leaves its shape in your skirt. Your shoulders ache faintly. Your hairpins feel heavier than metal has any right to feel. You move through the dim parlour and touch the back of the piano as you pass its wood-cool, now the evening entirely drained from it. On the stairs, the house creaks around you like an old ship at anchor. In your room, dawn is just beginning to pale the alley window. The picture on the washstand catches a thin line of light. You unfasten your dress, undo your stays, pull the pins from your hair one by one until the whole structure loosens and falls. The relief is immediate and almost tender. Your face in the mirror is stripped now of its evening arrangements. Powder faded, mouth quiet, eyes older than they were when you arrived, though not only from sorrow, also from knowing, and that may be the final cost as much as any other. Knowledge, not abstract knowledge from books or newspapers, but the intimate understanding of how society works when it wants comfort without conscience. You've seen men purchase gentleness and then condemn the women who supplied it. You've seen towns profit from vice and publicly scold it. You've seen how quickly beauty becomes labour, how often loneliness buys company, how rarely survival looks noble while it is happening. Still, you've also seen women make something livable inside all that contradiction. A joke in the kitchen, a peppermint in a pocket, a hidden note in a hem, a ribbon tied at the shoulder by a friend who knows exactly how tired you are. So you lie down at last beneath the quilt, the alley, light growing slowly whiter, the house around you, dropping into silence room by room. The mattress is narrow, the pillow is not luxurious. Yet rest comes anyway, not because the world has grown kinder, but because even weary bodies eventually insist on mercy. And as the final sounds of the house fade into the early morning hush, the Wild West itself seems to soften at the edges. The boardwalks no longer thud. The saloon piano is still, the street dust settles, the lantern light is gone. What remains is only the quiet fact of your breathing, the small safety of a closed door, the faint scent of soap and old perfume on your skin, and the knowledge that you have made it through another night in a life far less glamorous, far more complicated, and much more human than legend ever cared to admit. Now the room grows dim behind your eyes, the town drifts farther away, the last ember in the grate sighs and fades, the mirror keeps its slants, the canary does not sing. Upstairs, downstairs, beyond the walls, everything loosens its hold a little. The names, the prices, the laughter, the careful posture, the coal smoke, the cards, the ribbons, the bells, the ledgers, the faces in the parlour, all of it begins to blur into softness. You let it blur. You let the street go quiet. You let the house settle around you like an old story finally reaching its gentlest lines. And if there is any comfort to be found at the end of this long night, it is not in pretending the life was easy, noble, or romantic. It is in seeing it clearly and then allowing it at last to rest. The women who lived it were not symbols, they were people. Tired people, clever people, wounded people, funny people, practical people. Women who made warmth where they could and carried themselves through a hard, bright world with more skill than the world ever properly acknowledged. So the dawnlight thins, the quilt warms, your breathing slows. The town keeps its secrets for another day, and you finally are still. Sleep comes more softly now. The alley beyond your window is no longer harsh with boots and wagon wheels, only pale with morning. The boards of the house rest in their own quiet language. Somewhere deep below, the last heat in the stove gives off a gentle ticking sound, small and steady like a clock too sleepy to keep proper time. No one is laughing now. No music wanders through the walls. No one calls your borrowed name. You lie in the hush that comes after effort, after brightness, After all the little performances have slipped away, your shoulders are lighter, your hands are open on the quilt. The air smells faintly of cooled lamp oil, washed linen, and the last trace of powder left on the dressing table. Nothing asks anything of you for this moment. Outside the Wild West is still there, of course. The unfinished streets, the sharp bargains, the smoke, the dust, the dreams bought dear and lost quickly. But it has moved farther off, softened by distance, as all harsh places do when sleep begins to take them. The saloons are quiet. The parlour curtains are still. The ledger is shut. Even memory seems to fold itself away gently, like a dress laid carefully over the back of a chair. You do not have to hold the whole story anymore. Not the noise, not the cost, not the watchfulness, only this softer ending. A room, a bed, a slow breath in and out, and the sense that somewhere beyond the myth and the gossip and the flicker of old frontier legend, the women themselves are at last allowed to become human again in the dark. Not spectacles, not warnings, not fantasies, just tired souls drifting toward rest. So let the lamps go out completely now. Let the street fade, let the piano fall silent, let the old house sleep, and you sleep too, carried gently past the dust and the lanterns, past the velvet parlour, and the morning alley light into a quieter place where no one is performing, no one is counting, and no one is waiting for a knock at the door. Sweet dreams.